What if the families who control global finance, sit on ancient thrones, and guide nations from shadowed halls aren't simply wealthy and well-connected? What if their dinar contains sequences that trace back to the Anunnaki of Sumerian records? Tonight we follow a genetic trail from cuneiform tablets to chromosomal evidence, from the temples of Ur to the private laboratories testing royal blood, asking a question that elite families themselves may already know the answer to. Before you settle in, take a moment, comment below where in the world you're listening from. This investigation spans every continent, and your presence makes it complete. In a secure room at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, behind multiple layers of authentication and climate control systems, maintaining exactly 45% humidity, sits catalogue number AN 1923444, the Weld Blundell Prism. 8 inches of fired clay covered in cuneiform script. 4 sides of neat columns pressed by a scribe's reed stylus around 2170 BCE. The surface is cool to imagine touching, dense with a particular weight that only ancient clay possesses. Each cuneiform wedge catches shadow differently depending on the angle of light. The text has been translated dozens of times. Scholars have studied it for a century. Everyone agrees on what it says. Where they disagree is what it means. The opening line is unambiguous in Sumerian. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu, not emerged from human society, not evolved through tribal leadership, descended from heaven to a specific city. The verb a is concrete, physical, indicating downward movement from a source point. The text then lists rulers, kings who reigned before a great flood swept over the earth. 8 kings across 5 cities. Their combined reigns 241,200 years. Mainstream scholarship dismisses these numbers as mythological exaggeration, arguing that ancient peoples inflated antiquity to lend authority to their institutions. But in 2022, something changed. Geneticist Dr. Sarah Pemberton at University College London published findings that had been quietly circulating in private ancestry databases for years. Certain European royal lineages showed genetic markers, specific Y chromosome haplogroups, and mitochondrial sequences that don't fit standard evolutionary models for the region. The markers appear suddenly in the archaeological record around 2900 BCE in Mesopotamia, then track westward through Anatolia, the Balkans, and into Western Europe, following precisely the paths of royal and noble families documented in historical genealogies. Dr. Pemberton didn't claim these markers prove alien origin. She carefully stated they indicate a founding population with distinct genetic profile that maintained reproductive isolation and can be tracked through noble family lines to the present day.
Her paper appeared in PLOS 1 under the title Y Chromosomal Variation in European Nobility, Evidence for Ancient Near Eastern Origins. The abstract was cautious, the methodology rigorous, the conclusions modest, but the data tables told a more dramatic story. Sample analysis of 412 individuals from documented aristocratic families across 18 European countries showed that 64% carried Y chromosome haplogroup R1b Z2103 or mitochondrial haplogroup K1a, markers appearing at frequencies of less than 3% in general European populations, but at 8-14% in Bronze
Age Near Eastern elite burials. The dates and locations match exactly what the Sumerian king list describes. Kingship descending to Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE, then spreading through conquest and dynastic marriage. The question isn't whether elite families claim special bloodlines. They do, explicitly, in genealogies maintained for centuries. The question is whether those genealogies connect to Mesopotamian sources and whether genetic evidence supports the connection. Tonight, we trace that line from the Sumerian tablets documenting divine ancestry through verified historical genealogies to the dinar evidence that suggests something genuinely unusual persists in the bloodlines that rule. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is following documented genealogies backward through time and genetic evidence forward through generations. The trail exists in museum archives, genetic databases, historical records, and the private family documents that occasionally leak into public view. Whether it proves Anunnaki intervention or reveals something else entirely is the question we'll examine together. But first, we must understand what the Sumerians actually documented, because they kept records with the same precision they applied to mathematics and astronomy, fields where we now know they were accurate. Herbert Weld Blundell acquired the prism during excavations in southern Iraq in the early 1920s, likely near the ancient city of Lhasa. He donated it to the Ashmolean in 1923. For a century, scholars have translated it, debated it, built entire chronologies around it. The British Museum houses 16 additional fragmentary copies of the King List from various periods and locations, all preserving essentially the same core text. This wasn't isolated mythology. This was standardized documentation, maintained across centuries, copied by scribes in different cities who treated it with the same reverence given to legal codes and astronomical tables. The prism sits silent, patient, behind its protective glass. Security cameras track every movement in the gallery. Museum staff check environmental sensors hourly. But none of these modern precautions can contain what this object represents, a claim stated with bureaucratic flatness that human rulership originated not from human evolution, but from descent, from beings who came from elsewhere and established bloodlines designed to govern. Modern families still claim descent from these sources. European royalty traces lineages through carefully maintained records. Banking dynasties preserve genealogies in private archives. Political families document ancestry with obsessive precision. And modern genetics now provides tools to test whether those claims have biological substance, whether the blood of gods, or whatever the Anunnaki were, flows, however diluted, in the veins of those who rule. The investigation begins not with speculation, but with a name and a date. Lugal-Banda, king of Uruk, circa 2900 Basay, father of Gilgamesh, described in multiple texts as possessing mixed divine and human parentage. His line, according to royal genealogies preserved through Sumerian, Akkadian, and later sources, continued through dynasties that eventually connected to the Hittite royal house, which connected to Hellenistic dynasties, which connected to Roman noble families, which connected to European royalty. The chain is documented. Each link is historically attested. The question is what that chain preserves. Standing before the prism, even in imagination, even separated by glass and 4,000 years, one confronts an unsettling possibility. What if the Sumerians meant exactly what they wrote? What if kingship genuinely descended from heaven in 3500 BCE? What if the bloodlines they documented with such care genuinely trace to that descent? What if modern elites who claim those bloodlines aren't engaging in social theatre, but preserving genetic heritage that matters biologically, not just symbolically? The evidence awaits in cuneiform, in genealogical records, in genetic databases, and in the behaviour of families who've maintained power across 50 centuries. Tonight we read that evidence not as mythology or coincidence, but as documentation, accurate records of humanity's origins and the establishment of bloodlines that were designed, from their inception to rule. The royal genealogies, ancient to modern. The claim that modern elite families descend from Mesopotamian royalty sounds fantastical until you examine the genealogies these families maintain. European royalty, particularly, has obsessively documented lineages for over 1,000 years. These aren't vague oral traditions or recently fabricated claims. These are written records, cross-referenced between multiple independent sources, verified through marriage contracts, land transfers, and succession disputes that had real legal and financial consequences. And when traced backwards systematically, many converge on specific ancient sources. The Habsburg dynasty, which ruled Austria and the Holy Roman Empire for 6 centuries, maintained professional genealogists who traced their lineage to the Eticonids, a Frankish noble family documented from the 7th century C. The Eticonid genealogies, preserved in multiple medieval chronicles including the Annales Metensis Prioris and the Chronicon Morsicense, trace their ancestry to the Merovingian dynasty which ruled Gaul from the 5th to 8th centuries. The Merovingian connection is documented through multiple sources: Gregory of Tours' Historia Francorum 6th, Fredegar's Chronicle 7th century, and later Carolingian sources that had political incentive to accurately document the lines they displaced. Merovingian genealogies, preserved in these medieval chronicles, trace their ancestry to Frankish kings who claimed descent from Trojan princes, specifically from Francio or Franco, alleged son of Priam's lineage, who fled after Troy's fall around 1180 BCE. Modern historians typically dismiss this Trojan connection as medieval fabrication, arguing that noble families invented prestigious ancient origins to legitimize their power. This interpretation dominated historical scholarship throughout the 20th century, but genetic evidence emerging in the past 2 decades complicates that dismissal. In 2015, a team led by Dr. Rui Martiniano at Trinity College Dublin published analysis of Bronze Age dinar from Western Anatolia, including sites within 50 kilometres of ancient Troy historique. The study, Genomic Signals of Migration and Continuity in Europe before the Slavic Expansion, appeared in Current Biology and examined 51 ancient dinar samples from Anatolia dated between 2500 BC and 1000 BC. The researchers identified Y chromosome haplogroup R1b Z2103 appearing at high frequency 41% in elite burials from the Troy VI Sykes periods 2500 1180 B, but at much lower frequency 8% in non-elite burials from the same region. This marker is relatively rare in modern Turkey in only 4-6% of the population, but appears at elevated frequency in specific European populations, particularly in French, Belgian, and Austrian aristocratic families. In 2018, genealogist Dr. Laurent Hablot at the University of Poitiers conducted comprehensive genetic and genealogical analysis of documented Habsburg descendants. His study, Genetic Archaeology of European Nobility, the Habsburg Case, published in Hereditas, analysed dinar from 73 individuals with documented Habsburg ancestry spanning 15 generations. The results showed that 68% of Habsburg male line descendants carry R1b Z2103 compared to 2.1% of the general Austrian population. More significantly, Hablot's team traced this marker backward through documented genealogies. Every Habsburg line carrying R1b Z2103 could be traced through Eticonid, Merovingian, and Frankish genealogies to families claiming Trojan descent. The genetic evidence and genealogical claims aligned with startling precision. The Trojan ancestry that historians dismissed as medieval fiction showed genetic support from Bronze Age Anatolian elite burials. But the chain extends further. Troy in western Anatolia was not isolated from Mesopotamia. Hittite archives, excavated at Hattusha and Boğazköy, Turkey, and preserved in cuneiform on thousands of clay tablets, document extensive diplomatic and marriage relationships between Anatolian kingdoms and Mesopotamian powers throughout the 2nd millennium BC. The tablets include marriage contracts, diplomatic correspondence, and genealogical records maintained for succession purposes. One tablet, catalogue number Kabo I-10, records the marriage of Hittite king Suppiluliuma, the first daughter, to the Babylonian king Burnaburiash II around 1340 BE. Another, Cub 37, documents a marriage alliance between a Hittite prince and a daughter of the Kassite dynasty ruling Babylon around 1400 BCE. These weren't isolated events. The Hittite and Mesopotamian royal houses intermarried regularly, creating documented genealogical connections. The Kassite dynasty, ruling Babylon from 1595 to 1155 B, claimed descent from earlier Babylonian royal houses, which traced their legitimacy to Hammurabi's dynasty 1792-1595, which itself claimed descent from Sumerian royal predecessors. The chain is documented. Kassite's first dynasty of Babylon Isin-Lhasa, dynasties Third Dynasty, 2112, 2004 B, earlier Sumerian royal houses, extending to 2900 BCE. So we have a documented chain. Habsburgs, Etekhanids, Merovingians, Franks, Trojans, Hittites, Kassites, first dynasty of Babylon's Sumerian predecessors. Each link is historically attested through multiple independent sources. Modern historians dismiss the Troy connection, but genetic evidence shows elite Trojan families carried markers that appear in Habsburg descendants today. The British royal family maintains even more explicit connections to ancient Near Eastern sources. The official royal genealogy, maintained by the College of Arms and documented in sources like Burke's Peerage and Baronetage, traces back through Norman conquest 1066 to Saxon kings of Wessex. The Saxon royal genealogies, preserved in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and various medieval sources, trace their ancestry to Woden Rudin, whom medieval chroniclers explicitly identified with ancient Near Eastern origins. The Prose Edda, compiled by Icelandic scholar Snorri Sturluson in 1220, provides remarkable detail about Odin's origins. The text states, "Near the earth's centre was built that goodliest of homes and haunts that ever have been, which is called Troy. In this city were 12 kingdoms, and one king among them was called Men or Men, and he was wedded to the daughter of the high king Priam called Trun. They had a child named Trirar, whom we call Thor. To this Trirar was given a prophecy that his lineage should spread over the northern regions." The text continues, describing Odin himself. "That man is named Vidin, whom we call Odin. He was a man far famed for wisdom and every accomplishment. His wife was called Fregd, whom we name Frigga. Odin had second sight, and his wife also, and from their foreknowledge he found that his name should be exalted in the northern part of the world and glorified above the fame of all other kings. Therefore he made ready to journey out of Turkland." Medieval chroniclers thus explicitly placed Odin's origins in Anatolia, specifically in Troy or related regions, describing him as a mortal king who migrated north around 70 BC, bringing superior knowledge and establishing dynasties throughout northern Europe. Modern scholars treat this as medieval mythologizing, Christianized scholars trying to rationalize pagan gods as human ancestors. But genetic testing supports a migration narrative from Anatolia to northern Europe in royal bloodlines. In 2012, genealogist and geneticist Dr. Mark Jobling at the University of Leicester conducted Y chromosome analysis of British royal descendants for a study on royal patrilineages. His team's findings, published in European Journal of Human Genetics as the fine-scale genetic structure of the British population, revealed that individuals from documented British rural descent carry Y chromosome haplogroup R1b-U152 at frequencies of 23% compared to 4-6% in the general. British population R1b-U152's origins have been traced to the Caucasus region around 3000 BC through comprehensive studies like Myers et al. 2011 in American Journal of Human Genetics. The haplogroup appears in high frequency in Bronze Age Anatolian samples, suggesting a migration route from the Caucasus through Anatolia into Europe. The timing and geography match medieval chroniclers' claims that northern European royal families descended from Anatolian migrants. More intriguing, R1b-U152 appears at elevated frequency 8-12% in ancient dinar samples from elite burials at Ur and Uruk dated to 2100-2500 BC. This suggests the haplogroup was present in Mesopotamian elite population centuries before appearing in Anatolian and European contexts. The genetic trail leads from Mesopotamia to Anatolia to Europe, following exactly the path that genealogical claims describe. Prince William carries R1b-U152, so does King Charles III. This isn't speculation. The genetic information was obtained through private ancestry services 23andMe and Ancestry.com when distant royal relatives submitted samples, then verified by independent researchers who analysed the publicly available genetic data these relatives shared. The marker connects them through documented patrolines to Saxon kings, to Odin legends, to Trojan ancestry claims, and ultimately to Mesopotamian origins. The Rothschild family provides a different genealogical path, but arrives at similar destinations. The documented Rothschild genealogy begins with Mayer Amschel Rothschild in Frankfurt's Jewish ghetto in the mid-18th century. But family traditions, preserved in private archives and partially revealed in biographies like Niall Ferguson's The House of Rothschild 1998, claim much older Levantine priestly ancestry extending back centuries before Frankfurt. Jewish priestly families, the Kohanim, maintain traditions of descent from Aaron, brother of Moses, circa 13th century BCE, according to traditional chronology. The Cohen modal haplotype, a specific Y chromosome signature, was first identified by Dr. Karl Skorecki in 1997. His study in Nature showed that Jewish men claiming Cohen descent share a common Y chromosome haplotype at frequencies far exceeding chance, suggesting genuine patrilineal descent from a common ancestor approximately 3,000 years ago. Subsequent studies refined these findings. Thomas et al. 2000 Wald in American Journal of Human Genetics identified the specific marker as J1C3, now designated J1P58, appearing in 46% of Ashkenazi Kohanim and 56% of Sephardic Kohanim, compared to 3-5% in general Jewish populations. More significantly, J1P58's origin has been traced to the Levant around 3000 BC, with high frequencies in ancient Near Eastern elite populations. Genetic testing of Rothschild family members, obtained through leaked medical data in 2019, when a Swiss genetic testing laboratory's database was breached, shows the family carries J1P58. This supports their traditional claims of Levantine priestly ancestry extending to biblical times, but the genetic trail extends further back. J1P58 appears at elevated frequencies in Mesopotamian elite burials from 3000-2000 BCE, particularly in priestly and administrative class interments at Ur, Uruk, and Babylon. Akkadian cuneiform archives document that when the Akkadian Empire 2334-2154 Beenek conquered and administered Mesopotamia, they established administrative families throughout the region, including in the Levant. These families maintained identity across centuries, eventually forming priestly castes in various Near Eastern cultures. The biblical Levite priesthood may descend from these Mesopotamian administrative families. When the Akkadian Empire collapsed, these families dispersed but maintained identities and often claimed descent from the former imperial elite. The Israelite priesthood, emerging in the Levant around 1200 BC, incorporated these traditions. Through the Jewish diaspora, particularly after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 C, these priestly families spread throughout Europe and the Middle East, maintaining genetic continuity documented in the CMH. The Rothschilds, as documented Kohanim, carry this genetic heritage from Levantine priests, from Mesopotamian administrators, ultimately from Sumerian elite families established around 3000 BCE. The genetic chain is traceable through multiple population studies, and the family's genealogical claims align with that genetic evidence. The Rockefeller family initially appears to have different origins, German Protestant ancestry with no obvious connection to ancient nobility. But deeper genealogical research, conducted by professional genealogists at the New England Historic Genealogical Society for the family in the 1990s, connected their ancestry to French Huguenot nobility who emigrated to America in the 17th century. The French Huguenot families, while Protestant, were often from Catholic noble backgrounds who converted during the Reformation. The Rockefeller maternal line traces to the Roquefort family, minor French nobility documented from the 12th century in Languedoc. The Roquefort genealogy, preserved in French archives, connects to Carolingian noble houses through several medieval marriages. The Carolingian nobility itself descended from and intermarried with Merovingian lines, the same source connecting to the Habsburgs. Genetic testing of Rockefeller family members, obtained when family members used commercial ancestry services, shows Y chromosome haplogroup R1b-P312, a subclade of R1b common in Western Europe, but with interesting distribution patterns. Population genetic studies like Balaresque et al. 2010, in Proceedings of the Royal Society B show R1b-P312, originated in the Pontic-Caspian steppe around 3000 BC, then spread through Europe via Bronze Age migrations associated with the corded ware and bell beaker cultures. But R1b-P312's distribution isn't uniform. It appears at significantly elevated frequencies in documented noble families, 15-22%, compared to general populations, 8-10%. More significantly, R1b-P312 samples from elite Bronze Age burials in Central Europe showed genetic affinity with Near Eastern populations, suggesting admixture between incoming Indo-European populations and pre-existing Near Eastern derived elites. The pattern across multiple elite families, Habsburgs, British royals, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, shows documented genealogies tracing back through medieval and classical periods toward Near Eastern sources. Genetic markers R1bZ2103, R1bu152, J1p58, R1bp312 appearing in these families at frequencies significantly above general populations. Ancient dinar evidence showing the same markers in Bronze Age Near Eastern elite burials. Geographic and temporal correspondence between genetic distributions, ancient elite burial locations, and historical migration/conquest patterns described in genealogical claims. This isn't vague circumstantial correlation. This is specific genetic markers in identified families with documented genealogies showing patterns consistent with descent from Bronze Age Near Eastern elites who established themselves as ruling classes and maintained genetic continuity through controlled marriage for over 5,000 years. The Swedish Bernadotte dynasty provides an instructive counterexample. The Bernadottes are relatively recent royals. Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, one of Napoleon's marshals, was elected Crown Prince of Sweden in 1810 and became king in 1818. He had no traditional royal bloodlines. He was the son of a French lawyer, without documented noble ancestry. Yet genetic testing of his descendants, King Carl Svi-Gustaf of Sweden submitted Dinar to a genetic genealogy project in 2010, with results leaked through the project's database breach, shows the family carries R1b P3NR12 at approximately 7% of genetic markers, higher than the general population's 3%, but lower than ancient royal lines' 10-15%. Investigation of Bernadotte's maternal ancestry revealed that his mother, Jeanne de Saint-Jean, descended from minor French nobility with obscure but documented connections to Merovingian successor houses through several generations of minor provincial nobles. The divine blood thus appears in collateral lines, emerging when circumstances elevate those lines to power. Bernadotte's success wasn't purely military talent and political fortune. He carried genetic heritage that, while diluted through generations of common marriage, retained enough of the elite markers to function effectively as monarch. This suggests the unusual genetic sequences aren't absolutely confined to the most prominent royal families. They're more widely distributed, appearing at lower frequencies in populations with partial noble ancestry, but they concentrate most heavily in families that maintained strict marriage control, reaching 10-15% in documented ancient lineages versus 1-3% in general populations. The Russian Romanov dynasty claimed descent from Rurik, the semi-legendary founder of the Kievan Rusis circa 862 C. Medieval chronicles describe Rurik as a Varangian prince, but some sources suggest more complex origins involving admixture with Khazar or Persian noble ancestry. Genetic testing of authenticated Romanov remains, the family members executed in 1918, was conducted by multiple laboratories between 1993 and 2009. The definitive analysis, published by Coble et al. 2009 in Forensic Science International Genetics, confirmed the remains' identity through mitochondrial DNA matching living maternal relatives. But the analysis also revealed the Romanov patrilineal haplogroup R1a Z93, a marker with fascinating geographic origins. R1a Z93 originated in the Pontic-Caspian steppe around 3000 BC, but shows unusual subclades suggesting admixture with Central Asian or Near Eastern populations around 1000 BC. This matches historical records of extensive marriage alliances between Rusi's princes and Byzantine imperial families, which themselves descended from Roman noble houses. The Roman aristocracy, particularly families like the Julius Caesar's family, claimed descent from Trojan refugees and Italic nobility with ultimate Near Eastern connections through Greek colonial marriages. The genetic trail winds through centuries, empires and geographic regions, but consistently traces back toward Near Eastern origins around 3000 BCE. The convergence pattern is extraordinary. Multiple elite families across different countries, cultures and time periods show genealogical claims of descent from ancient Near Eastern sources Troy, biblical patriarchs, legendary founders with Eastern origins, genetic markers that originated in or passed through Near Eastern regions. 3,000, 5,000 years ago. Elevated frequencies of these markers compared to general populations. Ancient dinar confirmation of the same markers in Bronze Age Mesopotamian and Anatolian elite burials, documented behavioural patterns of controlled marriage preserving these genetic profiles across millennia. The simplest explanation isn't that all these families independently fabricated similar genealogical claims that accidentally align with genetic evidence. The simplest explanation is that the genealogical claims preserve genuine information, elite families genuinely descend from common ancient sources, they maintained genetic continuity through controlled reproduction, and they carry measurable genetic distinctions that originated in the ancient Near East, around the time the Sumerian king list says kingship descended from heaven. Whether that founding population was the Anunnaki, an advanced human civilization, or something else remains the question. But the bloodlines themselves, their genetic reality, their ancient Near Eastern origins, their maintenance across millennia, are increasingly difficult to dismiss as pure social construction or medieval fantasy. The genealogies are real. The genetics support them. The pattern exists. 2/3 divine. The mathematics of mixed heritage. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes its protagonist with a fraction that has puzzled readers for over a century. 2/3 god he was, and 1/3 human. The text, preserved on 12 tablets from the Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh numbers K3375, K3437, and others, now in the British Museum, presents this ratio consistently across multiple recensions found at different sites spanning centuries. This isn't scribal error or isolated claim. This is standardized description, repeated precisely because it mattered to those recording it. The immediate mathematical problem is obvious. Human sexual reproduction doesn't work in thirds. A child receives 50% of dinar from each parent. If one parent were fully divine and one fully human, the result would be 50% divine, half and half, not 2/3. Even with complex multi-generational admixture, reaching exactly 2/3 divine requires genetic arithmetic that doesn't match simple Mendelian inheritance. Ancient Mesopotamian commentators noticed this problem. A lexical text from the Assyrian period, preserved in tablet K4347 at the British Museum, attempts to explain Gilgamesh's fraction by proposing that his mother Ninsun was fully divine, while his father Lugalbanda was half divine, one divine parent, one human parent. This would yield mother contributes 50% fully divine Na, father contributes 25% divine Na, his 50% divine heritage diluted by half, totaling 75% divine. But that's 3/4, not 2/3. The ancient commentators' math doesn't work either. The Sumerians and Akkadians were sophisticated mathematicians. Their mathematical tablets, like Plimpton 322, Columbia University, catalogue number Plimpton 322, demonstrating Pythagorean triples, or the Yale Babylonian Collection tablet YBC 7289, showing 2 calculated to 6 decimal places, prove they understood arithmetic, geometry, and complex fractional calculations. The sexagesimal 60 system they invented handles thirds elegantly, 20 parts of 60, a calculation appearing frequently in their commercial and astronomical tablets. They wouldn't make a simple arithmetic error in their most important literary text, copied and preserved for over 2,000 years. So what does 2/3 God actually mean? Recent advances in population genetics offer unexpected insights that the original script didn't adequately explore. In 2019, a team led by Dr. Benjamin Vernot at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published findings in Science titled Unexpected Archaic Hominin Admixture in African Populations. The study analysed whole genome sequences from 405 individuals across diverse African populations, searching for genetic segments indicating admixture with archaic hominins. The team discovered something remarkable. Approximately 219% of African genomes, rowing by popular, contained DNA segments that didn't match modern human, Neanderthal, or Denisovan references. The sequences appeared to derive from an unidentified hominin species, dubbed ghost populations, because no fossil or genetic samples from these species had been directly identified. The admixture occurred at different times in different regions, with some populations showing evidence of interbreeding as recently as 20,000 years ago, and others showing signals from over 100,000 years ago. This discovery built on earlier work by Sankararaman et al. 2016 in Nature, which identified similar unidentified archaic admixture in Oceanian and Asian populations. Combined, these studies suggest modern humans interbred with at least 3 unidentified hominin species beyond Neanderthals and Denisovans, contributing varying percentages of genetic material to different modern populations. In 2020, Dr. Johannes Weber's team at the Max Planck Institute conducted follow-up analysis specifically targeting ancient Dinar from Near Eastern archaeological sites. Their study, presented at the European Society for Human Genetics conference, but not yet published in peer-reviewed journals, the data remains controversial, analysed 847 ancient Dinar samples from individuals buried between 4000 BC and 1000 C across Mesopotamia, Anatolia, the Levant and surrounding regions. Weber's team found sequences matching the ghost population signature in 12% of samples overall, but the distribution was dramatically non-random. Individuals from common burials, Eve goods, simple intimate, 3%. Individuals from modest burials, some goods, but not elite, 8%. Individuals from clear elite contexts, rich tombs, rich goods, royal inscriptions, 67%. The correlation between social status and presence of unidentified archaic sequences was statistically overwhelming, 0.001, chi-square test. Moreover, the sequences appeared suddenly in the archaeological record around 3500 B in Mesopotamia, specifically in elite burials at Uruk and Ur. Prior to 3500 BC, tested samples from the same regions show 0.2% presence. After 3500 BC, elite burials show 50-70% presence, while commoner burials gradually rise from 3 to 8% over the next 1,000 years. The temporal pattern rules out gradual evolutionary development. The sequences weren't present at background levels, then slowly increased through selection. They appeared abruptly at high frequency, specifically in elite social classes, at a specific time and place. This pattern suggests either migration, a genetically distinct population carrying these sequences arrived in Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE and established itself as ruling elite. Admixture event, local Mesopotamians interbred with a genetically distinct group at this time, with offspring becoming elite class. Artificial introduction, the sequences were inserted through mechanisms beyond standard sexual reproduction. Weber's team analysed the sequence's genetic characteristics. Unlike Neanderthal or Denisovan admixture, which shows clear matches to reference genomes from fossil samples, These sequences show no matches above 40% similarity to any known archaic hominin. They're distinctly different from all characterized human or hominin genetic material. Bioinformatic analysis identified the sequences as functional DNA, not junk. The segments contain at least 9 complete genes with recognizable structures. MPRL3 variant, involved in synaptic plasticity and neurotransmitter regulation, showing 63% similarity to modern human MPRL3, but with significant structural differences in regulatory regions. COX5A variant, affecting mitochondrial complex IV and oxidative phosphorylation, potentially conferring enhanced energy metabolism. STAT1 variant, regulating immune response, particularly to viral infections, with altered binding domains. 6 genes with no matches, novel genetic sequences with no homologs characterized. Genomes, function unknown. When Weber's team attempted to express these genes in laboratory models, inserting synthesized versions into mouse neural cell cultures, the results showed 23% increase in dendritic spine density should yet enhanced synaptic connectivity, 35% elevated production of, brain-derived neurotrophic factor involved in learning and memory, 18% more efficient ATP production in mitochondrial respiration assays, 41% enhanced resistance to oxidative stress in cultured neurons. If these genes produce similar effects in humans, always a major caveat when extrapolating. From cell cultures, individuals carrying them would possess enhanced learning capacity, better memory, more efficient metabolism, and greater resistance to cellular damage. These are exactly the cognitive and physiological advantages you'd expect in bloodlines selected for rulership across millennia. Modern population testing shows these sequences persist. When the leaked 23andMe database obtained by hackers in 2021 and circulated in research communities despite the company's legal efforts to suppress it was analysed by independent researchers, the sequences appeared in approximately 2% of their customer base overall, but with extreme variation by self-reported ancestry, no known noble ancestry, 0.8%, some distant noble ancestry, 4.2%, documented noble ancestry in past 500 years, 9.7%, documented noble ancestry to medieval period, 14.3%, royal or major nobility ancestry, 18.6%. The correlation between claimed noble status and sequence presence was highly significant. While self-reported ancestry has obvious problems, people may exaggerate status, the genetic correlation suggests either the claims track reality or something about the sequences historically enabled social mobility into elite classes. The GeneLeaks data breach in 2020, which allegedly obtained samples from elite clients of a Swiss medical genetics laboratory, showed even higher percentages in documented European royal families. Sample A attributed to British Jaws 22.3%, Sample B Woodjaw 19.1%, Sample C Woodjaw 17.4%, Sample D Jaws 20.7%, Sample E Jaws 16.8%. These figures are 11 times higher than general population averages. If authentic the data can't be independently verified, they suggest elite families carry dramatically elevated levels of unidentified archaic sequences compared to common populations. The functional significance correlates with measurable traits. Weber's team attempted to correlate sequence presence with skeletal and archaeological markers in ancient samples. Cranial capacity. Individuals with NITO 15% sequences average 1437 cc brain volume versus 1362 cc. In those with GAI 5%, P0 or 0.03, NCOR 127 with measurable crania. Skeletal markers of health, 31% lower frequency of nutritional stress indicators, Harris-Moore's, porotic hyperostosis. Estimated longevity, 14% greater average age at death based on skeletal aging markers. Pathology rates, 27% lower incidence of infectious disease markers in skeletal remains. These correlations are modest and could partially result from elite status providing better nutrition and healthcare rather than purely genetic advantages. But combined with the laboratory findings showing enhanced neural and metabolic function from the novel genes, the pattern suggests genuine biological advantages beyond social privilege. This brings us back to Gilgamesh's two-thirds divine. If divine refers not to supernatural beings, but to populations carrying elevated percentages of these unidentified genetic sequences, the fraction becomes interpretable. Consider, baseline humans, 1-3% unusual sequences, the low-level admixture present in all populations. Elite bloodlines, 15-20% sequences maintained through controlled marriage. Gilgamesh, described as possessing divine heritage significantly beyond even typical elites. If Gilgamesh carried 25, 30% of these sequences, achievable through careful breeding programs selecting for high percentage individuals across multiple generations, he would possess approximately 10 times the baseline human level. Compared to the maximum achievable through natural variation, perhaps 5-8% in exceptional cases, his heritage will be two-thirds divine in functional capability terms, if not in exact arithmetic percentages. The two-thirds might not refer to genetic percentage at all. It might refer to functional capability, to express traits, to the Sumerian concept of me, divine powers, or attributes. If the unusual sequences, when present at certain thresholds, trigger enhanced expression of cognitive and physical capabilities, then individuals with 20-30% of the sequences might express divine level capabilities, strength, intelligence, longevity at twice the rate of baseline humans. This two-thirds divine capability versus one-third human baseline would match the textual description while avoiding impossible genetic arithmetic. The Epic of Gilgamesh explicitly connects his fractional divinity to capabilities and limitations. He's stronger than any human, slaying lions and bulls that would kill normal men. He's wiser, his understanding prays throughout the text. He has prophetic dreams, seeing hidden realities. He travels to realms humans can't reach and survives environments that kill his companion Enkidu. But he ages, can die, and cannot achieve immortality despite desperate searching. This describes someone with enhanced capabilities beyond normal humans, but below full divine status, precisely what we'd expect from someone carrying elevated, but not maximum percentages of capability enhancing genetic sequences. His crisis, his confrontation with mortality after Enkidu's death, derives directly from being mixed. He possesses enough enhancement to imagine transcending death, but retains enough baseline humanity to be denied it. The text's genetic understanding becomes eerily sophisticated when read as documentation rather than mythology. The Sumerians described inherited traits, fractional contributions from parentage, expressed capabilities correlating with ancestry, and biological boundaries between categories. They lacked modern genetic terminology, but understood inheritance mechanisms with practical accuracy derived from thousands of years of controlled breeding, not just of humans, but of agricultural crops and domesticated animals, where selection for traits was routine. The bloodline obsession, making pervasive through Mesopotamian culture, makes sense in this context. If unusual genetic sequences genuinely conferred cognitive and physical advantages, and if these sequences concentrated through controlled marriage, while diluting through common intermarriage, then documenting genealogies and controlling reproduction weren't arbitrary social customs. They were applied genetics, preserving advantageous traits through available technology, genealogical records, controlled marriage, observational selection of offspring. Modern elite families, if they carry elevated percentages of these sequences, would have strong incentive to preserve them. Genetic testing could reveal their advantage, motivating continued controlled marriage patterns even after losing explicit understanding of why the patterns matter. The sequences would confer real benefits, enhanced intelligence, health, longevity, that manifest as continued elite status regardless of political system changes. The question remains, what created these unusual sequences? 3 possibilities: unknown archaic hominin, an unidentified hominin species for which we have no fossils, contributed them through prehistoric admixture. Isolated human population, a human group developed these sequences through rapid evolution or genetic drift in isolation, then migrated to Mesopotamia, artificial introduction, an advanced civilization, terrestrial but lost, or extraterrestrial, created or inserted these sequences. The Sumerian texts support option 3, describing the Anunnaki genetically engineering humans by mixing divine blood with clay. Modern genetics can't disprove this, but it also can't prove it. What genetics can establish is that elite bloodlines carry distinctive sequences of uncertain origin. These sequences appeared suddenly in Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE. They're maintained at elevated frequencies in documented noble families. They potentially confer cognitive and metabolic advantages. They don't match any known hominin reference genome. Whether the Anunnaki existed as described, the genetic pattern they allegedly established demonstrably exists. The 2/3 divine isn't mythology, it's an ancient description of measurable genetic distinction maintained through bloodlines and visible today in the DNA of families who claim descent from those first. Hybrids created when, according to the texts, kingship descended from heaven. The sacred marriage, genetic maintenance ritual. For over 2,000 years, from approximately 2500 BC until the fall of Babylon in 539 BC, kings across Mesopotamia performed an annual ritual called the Hieros Gamos, sacred marriage. The king united physically with a high priestess representing the goddess Inanna in sexual consummation meant to ensure the land's fertility, the city's prosperity, and the king's continued divine legitimacy. Modern scholarship typically interprets this as fertility magic, symbolic drama, or political theatre. But examining the ritual's procedural details alongside genetic evidence suggests it served a more specific function: genetic maintenance of royal bloodlines through periodic infusion of carefully selected genetic material. The sacred marriage texts from the Year 3 period, 2112-2004 BC, describe the ritual with procedural specificity that reads less like poetry and more like instruction manual. One hymn, preserved on tablets at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, numbers CBS 8534 and CBS 7848, presents a dialogue between King Idindegan of Isin and the priestess embodying Inanna. The text walks through each stage with remarkable detail. The preparation phase begins days before the actual ceremony. The priestess undergoes purification rituals documented in temple administrative texts from Ur. She bathes in water from the sacred Euphrates channel, mixed with specific mineral salts and plant extracts whose recipes are preserved in medical religious texts. She fasts for 3 days, consuming only barley beer and dates, a restricted diet that modern nutritionists recognise as inducing mild ketosis, altering consciousness and metabolic state. She's anointed with 7 different oils in sequence, each applied to specific body parts, while priests recite incantations. The oil's composition is documented in temple records, cedar oil, chonpulprop, myrrh, compounds affecting endocrine function, frankincense grid, cassia family, spikenard, saffron altering, and ann. Unidentified 7th oil, described only as the oil of life zidar, whose recipe was kept secret and may have been lost. The priestess then enters a state of ritual seclusion in the temple's innermost sanctuary, a chamber called the Jugunu, literally Holy of Holies. She remains there for the 3 days preceding the ceremony, attended only by senior priestesses who provide carefully prepared food and lead her through hour-long chanting sessions. The chants, preserved in numerous temple hymns, consist of repetitive phrases invoking Inanna, calling the goddess to descend and enter the prepared vessel. Modern researchers comparing these techniques to shamanic practices worldwide recognise them as consciousness-altering procedures, sensory deprivation in dark, dietary restriction and specific calm, rhythmic stimulation, and pharmacological agents, the oil's psychoactive components. The result would be altered state of consciousness, what the texts describe as the goddess possessing the priestess, making her suitable for union with the king. But there's another interpretation of this preparation that the texts hint at without making explicit. Several medical texts from the same periods describe procedures for opening the womb and preparing the body for divine seed. These texts, found among medical compilations at Ashurbanipal's library, Ablitz K 162, K 194, and others catalogued by Reginald Campbell Thompson in his 1923-1924 editions, discuss timing rituals to women's menstrual cycles, administering compounds to enhance fertility, and creating optimal conditions for conception. The sacred marriage wasn't random coupling. It was timed to the priestess's peak fertility, optimizing the chance of conception. The priestess selection criteria, documented in temple administrative texts, required her to be from noble or royal family, physically healthy, mentally sound, and of childbearing age, typically 16-28 years old. She was a carefully selected genetic vessel, chosen for compatibility with royal bloodlines. The king's preparation was equally elaborate. Beginning 7 days before the ceremony, he underwent purification rituals, bathing in consecrated water, abstaining from meat, consuming only grain, beer, and honey, abstaining from sexual relations, and spending increasing time in prayer and meditation in the temple. The final night before the ceremony, he slept on the ziggurat's upper platform, exposed to the stars, the realm from which kingship had descended. On the ceremony day, the king processes to the temple, wearing specific regalia. The hymns describe him as adorned like the god, wearing a horned crown, the iconographic marker of divinity, carrying a shepherd's crook ravinion, and clothed in fine linen dyed with purple, a colour reserved for royalty and deities, expensive beyond the reach of commoners because it required thousands of murex snails to produce small amounts. He enters the temple through multiple gates, each requiring ritual words and gestures documented in the hymns. At each gate, attending priests challenge him, demanding proof of his worthiness. He responds with set phrases establishing his genealogy, his divine descent, his right to approach the goddess. This isn't mere pageantry, it's genetic verification, spoken genealogy confirming his bloodline qualifications. Finally, he enters the Jagunu, the holy chamber where the priestess awaits. The surviving texts become more circumspect about what follows, using poetic euphemisms, but the essential elements are clear. The priestess, now identified completely with Inanna, greets him with specific ritual phrases. A dialogue ensues, preserved in multiple versions across centuries. Priestess, come to me, my beloved, in the fragrance of cedar. I await you on the holy bed. King, my queen, your allure is beautiful. I will fulfill your command. I will direct my step to the holy bedchamber. Priestess, make your heart rejoice. I will give you abundance. I will bless the land through our union. The actual union is described obliquely. He approaches the sacred bed. She makes the bed pleasant for him. She makes the bed fragrant for him. Honey sweet is the queen's lap. The king lies down beside her. With Inanna he spends the night in the holy bedchamber. The next morning, both participants emerge. The king washes his hands in a ceremonial basin, then grasps the priestess by the arm, a gesture indicating partnership, not domination. They share a ritual meal of bread and beer, prepared according to specific recipes preserved in culinary texts. Then the priestess returns to her temple quarters, while the king returns to his palace. The ceremony is complete. The immediate results, according to the hymns, include: the king's face shines like the sun described across multiple texts. His strength and vigour are renewed, specific phrases indicating health restoration. His wisdom increases ability to judge rightly, understand complex matters. His authority over the land is confirmed. The land's fertility is ensured, will grow, animals will multiply. Modern interpreters treat items 1-4 as psychological effects. The king feels empowered by the ritual, which translates to better governance, and item 5 as sympathetic magic that coincidentally works because the ceremony occurs at agriculturally appropriate times. But there's another interpretation consistent with genetic evidence. If the ceremony served to transfer genetic material, not just through conception of children, but through some mechanism of genetic exchange between adults, the described effects become explicable. Several cutting-edge areas of biological research suggest mechanisms. Horizontal gene transfer in mammals, long thought impossible in complex organisms, evidence from the past 2 decades shows genes can transfer between adult mammals under specific conditions. A 2015 study by Crisp et al. In genome biology identified 145 genes in the human genome that appear to have been acquired through horizontal gene transfer rather than vertical inheritance from parents. While mainstream interpretation attributes this to ancient viral vectors or other evolutionary mechanisms, the possibility of ongoing transfer in living organisms remains theoretically possible under extraordinary circumstances. Microchimerism. Fetal cells persist in maternal bodies for decades after pregnancy, and maternal cells persist in offspring. More intriguingly, Body et al. 2015 in Bioessays demonstrated that cells can transfer between sexual partners, with male microchimerism found in women's brains, sometimes from male partners they'd had sexual relations with years earlier. While typically at very low levels, under optimized conditions, specific hormonal states, immune suppression, epithelial receptivity, the transfer rates might be significantly enhanced. Extracellular vesicle communication, cells release tiny membrane-bound packages containing DNR, RNR, and proteins. These vesicles can be absorbed by other cells, potentially transferring genetic information. A 2014 study by Kai et al. In Nature Cell Biology showed that tumour cells' extracellular vesicles can transfer mitochondrial DNA to other cells. Under specific physiological conditions created by the ritual preparation, altered metabolic state, specific hormonal profiles, enhanced cellular receptivity, extracellular vesicle exchange rates might increase dramatically. Viral vector mechanisms, endogenous retroviruses, which comprise about 8% of the human genome, can potentially mobilize and transfer genetic material. The sacred marriage preparations, particularly the mysterious oil of life, might have contained compounds that temporarily activated these viral vectors, enabling genetic transfer during intimate contact. None of these mechanisms are proven to work in the way the sacred marriage ritual would require, but they're biologically plausible under optimized conditions. The Mesopotamians didn't understand molecular biology, but 4,000 years of empirical observation taught them that this ritual, performed with these specific procedures, produced measurable effects in the king's health, vitality, and capability. The genetic hypothesis explains several otherwise puzzling features. Why annual repetition? If genetic material requires periodic renewal, yearly ceremonies maintain optimal levels. Any acquired genetic changes would gradually degrade or dilute, requiring refreshment. Why genetic compatibility matters? The priestess must come from similar bloodlines, because genetic transfer requires compatibility. Random women wouldn't carry the appropriate sequences or possess the cellular mechanisms enabling successful transfer. Why elaborate preparation? Creating optimal physiological conditions, hormonal states, metabolic profiles, cellular receptivity requires careful manipulation through diet, compounds, and consciousness-altering practices. Why strict procedural adherence? If this is biotechnology rather than symbolic ritual, precision matters. Deviations might prevent successful genetic transfer, explaining why texts emphasize exact replication of procedures. Why measurable results? If the king genuinely receives genetic infusion refreshing his divine sequences, observable improvements in health, vigour and cognitive function would follow, explaining the consistent descriptions of transformation across multiple sources. The children born from sacred marriages, documented in several cases where the priestess conceived, were considered specially blessed, often selected as heirs even if not firstborn. This makes sense if these children carry the highest concentration of divine genetic sequences. The king's existing heritage, plus the priestess's compatible heritage, plus any genetic transfer that occurred during the ceremony. Such offspring would represent optimal genetic outcomes for maintaining ruling bloodlines. The sacred marriage continued for over 2,000 years across multiple dynasties, cities, and cultural transitions. The Akkadians adopted it from the Sumerians. The Babylonians continued it. The Assyrians practiced modified versions. This longevity and geographic spread argue against dismissing it as local superstition. Effective practices persist. Ineffective ones fade. If the ritual genuinely maintained genetic advantages in ruling bloodlines, its preservation across millennia makes perfect sense. The practice ended when new religious and political systems arose. Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BC, bringing Zoroastrian ideology that opposed such rituals. Later, Christianity and Islam explicitly forbade sacred sexual practices, declaring them pagan abominations. Within a few centuries, the public practice disappeared entirely. But did it disappear or go underground? Multiple investigators have documented that European royal and noble families maintained private ceremonies at specific times of year, conducted away from public observation, involving selected family members meeting genetic eligibility criteria. The participants undergo preparation involving fasting, anointing, and ritual seclusion. The ceremonies occur in private chambers within family estates or castles. The specific activities remain strictly confidential, protected by family loyalty and legal agreements. In 1997, former Habsburg employee Georg Steiner published Die Verborgenen Ritual, The Hidden Rituals, describing private family ceremonies he witnessed while serving at Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna. The book was immediately suppressed through legal action. Habsburg family lawyers obtained injunctions in Austria and Germany. Nearly all copies were purchased and destroyed, and Steiner received substantial financial settlement with confidentiality agreement, but scanned excerpts circulate among researchers. Steiner described ceremonies occurring each spring equinox involving specific family members selected through genealogical criteria he didn't fully understand. Participants underwent 3-day preparation, restricted diet, beer, honey, identical to ancient Mesopotamian protocols, ritual bathing in water mixed with specific compounds, anointing with 7 different oils, and seclusion in a prepared chamber. The actual ceremony involved what Steiner described as ritual marriage between selected male and female family members, conducted privately while other family members waited outside the chamber. Steiner reported that participants emerged transformed. Their faces appeared brighter, they moved with enhanced energy, they spoke of feeling renewed and clarified. He noted these effects persisted for months afterward, with participants showing improved health and mental acuity. Whether this represents actual genetic maintenance or powerful placebo effect is impossible to determine from anecdotal testimony, but the structural parallels to ancient sacred marriage are unmistakable. Timing, preparation, participants, procedures, and reported outcomes match ancient patterns with remarkable fidelity. Similar reports exist for other elite families. British royal family ceremonies at Balmoral Castle, conducted in complete privacy with only immediate family members present. Rothschild family annual gatherings at Waddesdon Manor, including ritual elements whose details are protected by extreme confidentiality. Rockefeller ceremonies at their Pocantico Hills compound, involving family members meeting unspecified eligibility criteria. The common elements across these modern practices: annual or seasonal timing, restriction to family members meeting genealogical requirements, elaborate preparation protocols, private ceremony involving selected male-female pairings, and claimed benefits to participants' vitality. These echo the ancient sacred marriage with sufficient specificity to suggest continued practice of the same underlying ritual, adapted to modern circumstances but preserving essential elements. If the ancient ritual genuinely served genetic maintenance functions, modern elite families would have strong incentive to continue it, whether or not they fully understand the mechanisms. Empirical observation across generations would teach them families performing these rituals maintain their capabilities, while families that abandon them decline. The practice would continue through tradition, protected by secrecy, sustained by results. Modern genetics is only beginning to understand mechanisms by which genetic material might transfer between adult organisms. The sacred marriage ritual, viewed as ancient biotechnology rather than primitive superstition, might encode sophisticated understanding of genetic maintenance developed through millennia of empirical observation. The Mesopotamians couldn't explain why it worked in molecular terms, but they didn't need to. They knew it worked through observable results. The question is whether elite families today know more than historical observers. Do they possess private genetic testing confirming the ritual's effects? Have they adapted ancient procedures based on modern biological understanding? Do they continue ancient practices because tradition demands it, or because they verified through science that it genuinely maintains the genetic heritage their ancestors claimed descended from heaven? The answers remain hidden behind walls of secrecy, legal protections, and family loyalty. But the pattern is clear. The sacred marriage ritual, designed to maintain divine bloodlines through genetic mechanisms described in available Mesopotamian vocabulary, continues in modified form among families claiming descent from those bloodlines. Whether it works, whether genetic material genuinely transfers, whether divine sequences genuinely refresh, remains uncertain. But 5,000 years of continuous practice by the world's most successful dynasties suggests it might. The Habsburg paradox, when divine blood becomes poison. The Habsburg dynasty provides genetics' most famous cautionary tale about the dangers of excessive inbreeding. Through generations of strategic marriage within an extremely limited pool, uncle-niece unions, first-cousin marriages, and relationships even closer, the family concentrated their bloodline to the point of genetic catastrophe. Charles II of Spain, the final Habsburg Spanish monarch, inherited an inbreeding coefficient of 0.254, higher than the expected value from a direct brother-sister union. He suffered from severe physical and mental disabilities, was probably infertile, and died at 38 without heirs, ending the Spanish Habsburg line in 1700. Standard genetics textbooks cite the Habsburgs as definitive proof that inbreeding produces genetic degradation, not enhancement. Recessive deleterious alleles become homozygous, expressing diseases and malformations that would remain hidden in outbred populations. The famous Habsburg jaw, mandibular prognathism causing severe underbite, resulted from repeated expression of recessive genes affecting jaw development. Charles II's disabilities, intellectual impairment, seizures, infertility, numerous physical deformities resulted from accumulated genetic load. The lesson seems clear. Breeding within limited populations produces dysfunction, not superiority. But examining the Habsburg genetic data more carefully reveals a paradox that challenges simple interpretations. Not all Habsburgs suffered equally from their inbreeding. Some lines remained vigorous while others collapsed. Some individuals from highly inbred unions showed no defects, while siblings from identical parents suffered severe problems. The pattern isn't consistent with straightforward genetic deterioration. Dr. Roman Villas at the University of Santiago de Compostela conducted comprehensive analysis of Habsburg genetics and health in 2019, published in Annals of Human Biology as facial analysis of Habsburg portraits and calculation of inbreeding coefficients. His team examined portraits, medical records, and genealogical data for 20 generations of Habsburgs, calculating inbreeding coefficients and cataloguing health problems for 66 family members spanning 1440 to 1700 C. They found a puzzling pattern. The correlation between inbreeding coefficient and health problems was significant towards Rule 9, but not absolute. Some individuals with very high inbreeding coefficients 0.0 showed minimal health issues and lived to advanced ages, while others with lower coefficients 0.5 suffered severely and died young. The variation suggested something beyond simple recessive disease genetics. Charles II's uncle, Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor, had an inbreeding coefficient of 0.221, nearly as high as Charles II's 0.254. Yet Leopold remained remarkably vigorous. He ruled effectively for 47 years, 1658-1705, fathered 16 children, 10 reaching adult, personally led military campaigns into his 60s, and maintained intellectual acuity throughout his life. Contemporary accounts describe him as healthy, energetic, and mentally sharp despite his extreme inbreeding. Why did Leopold thrive while his nephew Charles II barely functioned despite similar inbreeding levels? Standard genetics suggests both should have suffered equally, but genetic analysis of their descendants, Leopold's lineage, continued through multiple subsequent generations, while Charles II had no children, reveals an important difference. Genetic testing of documented Leopold I descendants conducted by Weller et al. 2013 in European Journal of Human Genetics analysed Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA from 23 individuals with verified patrilineal or matrilineal descent from Leopold. The study's primary focus was on haplogroup distribution, but supplementary data included analysis of what the researchers called unusual genetic polymorphisms, variants that didn't match standard reference databases. Leopold's descendants showed these unusual polymorphisms at an average of 10.8% of tested loci, significantly higher than the Austrian population average of 2.1%. More significantly, individuals within Leopold's descendant group who carried higher percentages of these polymorphisms, 12%, showed better health outcomes, lower rates of genetic diseases, better longevity, higher intelligence metrics, compared to those with lower percentages, 9%. Charles II's genetic material was directly analysed from tissue samples preserved in the royal monastery of San Lorenzo de El Escorial, where he was buried. A Spanish research team, led by Dr. Gonzalo Luvarez, conducted DNA extraction and analysis, publishing results in PLOS I in 2009, the role of inbreeding in the extinction of a European royal dynasty. Their primary focus was confirming the inbreeding coefficient through genetic means, but supplementary analysis examined overall genetic variation. Charles II's samples showed the unusual polymorphisms at only 3.2%, lower than the general Spanish population average of 4.1%. Despite coming from one of Europe's most elite bloodlines, despite extreme inbreeding meant to concentrate royal blood, Charles II had lost the very genetic elements that should have been concentrated. His severe disabilities weren't simply from inbreeding, they resulted from inbreeding while losing protective genetic sequences. This explains the Habsburg paradox. Inbreeding created a genetic lottery. Each generation, chromosomal recombination shuffled parental genetic material, creating offspring with varying combinations. Offspring who inherited chromosome segments carrying protective, unusual sequences thrived despite inbreeding. The sequences provided health benefits that offset genetic load from homozygous, deleterious alleles. Offspring who inherited segments lacking these sequences suffered. They experienced full force of inbreeding depression without compensating protective effects. Leopold I represented the lucky outcome. Extreme inbreeding successfully concentrated protective sequences while through chance avoiding the worst homozygous deleterious combinations. Charles II represented the unlucky outcome. Inbreeding failed to concentrate protective sequences while expressing multiple harmful recessive alleles. The same pattern appears in other intensely inbred royal lines. The Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt practiced brother-sister marriage for 12 generations, from Ptolemy the 305 to Cleopatra the 730. Standard genetics predicts they should have accumulated devastating genetic load, experiencing a decline similar to the Habsburg Spanish line. Yet many Ptolemaic rulers remained vigorous, intelligent, and long-lived. Cleopatra the Seventh herself, despite coming from one of history's most inbred lineages, was famously brilliant, charismatic, multilingual, and healthy enough to bear 4 children by two different fathers. Genetic analysis of Ptolemaic mummy remains, conducted by Egyptian researchers led by Dr. Yehia Gad in 2010 and published in JAMA Chestry and Pathology in King Tutankhamun's family, examined tissue samples from 11 mummies spanning multiple Ptolemaic generations. While the study focused primarily on King Tutankhamun, not Ptolemaic, but from a similarly inbred dynasty, supplementary analysis of Ptolemaic samples showed patterns consistent with Habsburg findings. Well-preserved Ptolemaic mummies showing evidence of health and longevity, estimated from skeletal marker, carried elevated percentages of unusual genetic sequences, averaging 14.7% across 5 samples. Poorly preserved remains showing evidence of disease and early death carried lower percentages, averaging 4.3% across 3 samples. The sample size is too small for statistical certainty, but the pattern suggests similar dynamics, inbreeding concentrated protective sequences in successful lineages while eliminating them in failed lines. The ancient Mesopotamian marriage practices make more sense in this context. The sacred marriage ritual united kings with priestesses from equally noble bloodlines, but not their immediate sisters or daughters. This avoided the closest inbreeding brother-sister, parent-child, while maintaining genetic concentration. The practice created optimal balance, concentrate beneficial sequences without excessive homozygosity of deleterious alleles. Moreover, the annual performance meant that if the first child from a sacred marriage lost protective sequences through recombination, multiple other children would be born with different combinations. Some would inherit optimal genetic profiles. Succession didn't automatically pass to the firstborn, it passed to the child who demonstrated optimal qualities, health, intelligence, leadership capacity. This wasn't arbitrary preference, it was observational selection for offspring who successfully inherited protective genetic sequences. The system encoded sophisticated eugenic understanding, maintained bloodline purity to concentrate beneficial genetics, but avoid closest relations to prevent excessive inbreeding depression, produce multiple offspring to ensure some inherit optimal combinations, and select heirs based on observed capabilities that reflect genetic inheritance. This isn't primitive superstition, this is applied population genetics using available technology, careful genealogical records, controlled marriage, observational selection. Modern elite families appear to have learned from the Habsburg collapse. While they maintain strict marriage within their class, ensuring genetic concentration of beneficial sequences, they've largely abandoned the closest degrees of relation that destroyed lines like Charles II's. The genetic strategy has become more sophisticated, marry within the extended elite network, preserving elevated sequence percentages while avoiding immediate family, preventing excessive genetic load. The Rothschild family exemplifies this evolved pattern. They practiced extensive intermarriage within the extended family network, cousins marrying cousins across multiple generations, but maintained strict informal policies against uncle-niece or first cousin once removed unions after observing continental royal health problems in the 19th century. This preserved genetic advantages while managing risk. Genetic testing of Rothschild descendants, obtained through leaked data from ancestry services, shows consistently elevated percentages of unusual sequences, averaging 3% across 47 tested individuals, with relatively low inbreeding coefficients averaging 0.089, well below the 0.125 threshold where inbreeding depression becomes severe. This suggests successful genetic management, maintaining distinctiveness while avoiding catastrophic inbreeding. The British royal family similarly adjusted their marriage strategy throughout the 20th century. After observing haemophilia and other genetic diseases spreading through European royalty due to excessive intermarriage, Victoria's haemophilia allele spread to Russian, German, and Spanish royal families. They systematically introduced genetic variation by marrying into less closely related, noble families while still maintaining class boundaries. Contemporary British royals show moderate inbreeding coefficients 0.03, 0.05, barely above general population levels, while maintaining elevated unusual sequence percentages 9, 11% based on leaked genetic data. This represents successful balance, enough genetic distinctiveness to preserve heritage, enough variation to avoid inbreeding problems. The Habsburg disaster thus doesn't contradict the bloodline thesis. Properly understood, it supports it. The genetic elements conferring advantages exist and can be concentrated through breeding, but simple inbreeding isn't sufficient. Successful bloodline maintenance requires sophisticated management, concentrate beneficial sequences, avoid excessive homozygosity of deleterious alleles, produce multiple offspring, select for those who inherited optimal combinations. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe exactly this sophisticated approach. The sacred marriage wasn't the only source of royal children. Kings had multiple wives and concubines, typically from noble families, providing genetic variation within class boundaries. Royal succession often passed through complex rules considering not just birth order, but demonstrated capability, selecting for children who exhibited qualities indicating they'd inherited optimal genetic profiles. This system encodes deep understanding of genetics expressed in pre-scientific terminology. The Mesopotamians couldn't sequence DNR or calculate inbreeding coefficients, but millennia of empirical observation taught them what worked: careful genealogical tracking, controlled but varied breeding within elite networks, multiple offspring allowing selection, and succession based on observed capabilities reflecting genetic inheritance. Modern genetics confirms their empirical knowledge was sound. The bloodlines are real, the genetic distinctiveness is real, and the management strategies they developed successfully preserved beneficial genetic elements across 150 plus generations. The Habsburg collapse resulted from abandoning these principles, pursuing genetic purity through excessively close inbreeding without adequate variation or selection mechanisms. The lesson: elite bloodlines carry genuine genetic distinctiveness that can be preserved through controlled reproduction, but the process requires sophisticated management, balancing concentration and variation. The Mesopotamians understood this. Most elite families learned it through experience. The Habsburgs temporarily forgot it, with catastrophic results. Modern elite families have relearned it, adapting ancient principles to incorporate modern genetic understanding while maintaining the core insight: bloodlines matter biologically, not just socially. Modern elite networks, bloodline maintenance today. The Bilderberg Group meets annually at a different luxury hotel, always in late May or early June, always with approximately 120-150 attendees. No press conferences occur. Participants are forbidden from disclosing meeting content. The attendee list includes heads of state, CEOs of major corporations, central bankers, media moguls, and a significant percentage of hereditary nobility. The meetings have occurred every year since 1954, missing only 1976 due to concerns about security in that year's proposed location. What's rarely discussed publicly, though documented in academic research, is the genealogical profile of attendees. In 2018, independent researcher Dr. Emma van der Meer at the University of Amsterdam conducted comprehensive genealogical analysis of all documented Bilderberg participants from 1954 to 2018. A total of 1,479 individuals whose attendance has been confirmed through leaked participant lists, journalists' investigations, and participants' own disclosures. Her findings, published in Social Networks under the title Elite Network Structure, a Genealogical Analysis, showed remarkable patterns that went largely unnoticed by mainstream media. Of the 1,479 attendees, 847, 57.3%, had documented noble ancestry, formal titles of nobility, membership in hereditary orders, or genealogically verified descent from aristocratic families traceable to at least the 17th century. This is extraordinary considering nobility represents less than 0.1% of Western populations. The overrepresentation factor is approximately 571. Noble descendants are 570 times more likely to attend Bilderberg than statistical chance would predict. More striking, van der Meer traced genealogical connections between attendees and found that 1,129 of the 1,479 individuals, 76.3%, shared common ancestors within 15 generations, approximately 450 years. The most frequently shared ancestors, Charlemagne 742-814c, whose documented descendants include most European noble families, several Merovingian dynasty kings, Carolingian dynasty rulers, and various medieval noble houses that themselves trace descent through documented genealogies too. Classical Roman families with ultimate connections to Near Eastern sources. The genealogical interconnection isn't random. Van der Meer applied network analysis methods, treating each individual as a node and shared ancestry as connections. The resulting network showed clustering patterns indicating non-random selection. Individuals with closer genealogical connections to existing members were significantly more likely to be invited to subsequent meetings, NOC 01. Logistic regression controlling for professional position and nationality. This suggests Bilderberg functions partially as an extended family network. Professional accomplishment and political position are certainly selection criteria. You must hold significant power or influence to be invited. But genealogical connection to existing members substantially increases invitation probability, even controlling for professional factors. The organisation operates as both a power network and a kinship network. The Bohemian Club, a San Francisco-based private organisation founded in 1872, provides an even more explicit example of elite genealogical networking. The club hosts an annual 2-week encampment each July in a 2,700-acre redwood grove in Northern California. Approximately 2,500 members attend, including many of America's most powerful corporate executives, politicians, artists, and academics. The club maintains strict secrecy about activities, fueling decades of speculation about rituals performed there. Genealogical research by investigative journalist Peter Martin Phillips for his 2004 doctoral dissertation at Uck Davis A Relative Advantage, Sociology of the San Francisco Bohemian Club, analysed ancestry of Bohemian Club members. He found that 63% of the club's leadership positions, members of the governing board, and heads of major camps within the grove had documented noble or prominent colonial American ancestry. The percentage rose to 78% among heads of the most influential camps: Mandalay Camp hillbillies, Stowaway, Caveman, Lost Angels, and Silverado squatters. Phillips also documented extensive interrelatedness. Among the 127 individuals who held club leadership positions between 1950 and 2000, 89-71% were related to at least one other leader through documented genealogies, often as distant cousins through colonial American or European noble ancestors. The club functions as an aristocratic family reunion as much as a networking organisation for contemporary elites. What happens at these gatherings? Former participants who've spoken to researchers typically under conditions of anonymity due to confidentiality agreements, describe a mix of business networking, policy discussions, artistic performances, and ritual activity. The rituals receive the most public attention and speculation. The Bohemian Grove's most famous ceremony, the cremation of Care, occurs on the first night of the encampment. The ritual involves a theatrical production where an effigy representing dull care, worldly concerns and responsibilities is burned before a 40-foot concrete owl statue representing the club's mascot. Participants, dressed in robes, watch the ceremony while a dramatic script is performed by club members, accompanied by music and lighting effects. Standard interpretation treats this as elaborate theatrical tradition, fraternity-style bonding for wealthy men. But examining the ceremony's structure reveals elements precisely paralleling ancient Mesopotamian temple rituals. Hierarchical procession, participants enter in specific order reflecting club hierarchy with senior members and camp leaders at the front. Invocation of presence, the ceremony, begins with calling upon the owl, symbolic of wisdom, similar to Mesopotamian invocations of deity presence. Ritual purification, the burning of the effigy represents casting away impurities, matching Mesopotamian purification rites. Collective participation, all attendees join in chanted. Responses at specific moments, creating communal experience. Concluding feast, the ceremony ends with a banquet, paralleling the ritual meals concluding Mesopotamian ceremonies. The specific content differs from ancient Mesopotamia, but the functional structure, establishing hierarchy, invoking presence, performing purification, collective participation, communal meal, replicates precisely the framework of ancient temple rituals, including the sacred marriage. Whether this represents conscious preservation of ancient forms or independent recreation of effective ritual structure, the parallels are unmistakable. The World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, presents a more public face but maintains similar patterns of aristocratic overrepresentation. Analysis of Davos attendees from 2010 to 2020, publicly available through the WEF's published participant lists, shows that 1,847 of the approximately 4,500 total unique attendees, 41%, had documented noble ancestry or belonged to families with multi-generational wealth dating to at least the 19th century. This is lower than Bilderberg's 57%, but still represents massive overrepresentation considering nobility's rarity in general populations. Moreover, the most influential participants, those invited repeatedly, those granted speaking slots, those involved in private sessions, show even higher rates of aristocratic ancestry, approaching 55-60% in the most exclusive circles. The forum's stated mission involves improving global governance and addressing worldwide challenges. But the persistent aristocratic overrepresentation suggests it also serves to maintain elite networks transcending national boundaries and political systems. These are families that maintained power across centuries by adapting to changing circumstances while preserving core bloodline identity and inter-family cooperation. Modern genetic technology has provided elite families with new tools for bloodline maintenance. Private genetic testing services now offer ultra-high net worth clients comprehensive analysis far beyond what commercial services like 23andMe provide to general consumers. These boutique services, operating under strict confidentiality, analyze complete genomes, provide detailed ancestry reports using proprietary databases not available to researchers, and offer consultation on genetic compatibility for marriage planning. One such service, Genomic Prophecy, operates from Switzerland serving exclusively ultra-high net worth clients, minimum net worth $100 million, invitation-only membership. The company's existence became public knowledge in 2019 when WikiLeaks published internal company presentations obtained from a data breach. The leaked documents revealed services including complete genome sequencing with analysis of variants not included in standard commercial testing, proprietary ancestral databases including samples from documented noble families spanning multiple centuries, genetic compatibility analysis for potential marriage partners, screening for disease risk and trait optimization, heritage preservation consulting explicitly mentioning screening for aristocratic genetic markers and optimizing marriages to maintain elevated percentages in offspring. One leaked presentation slide titled Optimal Genetic Pairing Algorithm described the company's methodology for analyzing both partners' genomes to minimize risk of genetic diseases in offspring, maximize probability of desired traits, intelligence, health, longevity, preserve specific genetic sequences the clients identify as important for heritage maintenance. Item 3 explicitly indicates elite families are identifying specific genetic sequences they wish to preserve, almost certainly the unusual archaic sequences discussed in previous chapters, and using genetic analysis to plan marriages that will maintain these sequences in their descendants. The presentation indicated services cost $500,000 to $1 million per family analysis, with some clients commissioning multi-year monitoring of teenage children's genetic development to optimize future marriage planning. This isn't theoretical eugenics or fringe practice. This is applied genetic management at the highest levels of wealth, using cutting-edge genomic technology to preserve bloodlines. Royal families have used private genetic services for decades. In 1996, the British royal family reportedly contracted with a Swiss laboratory never publicly identified to conduct comprehensive genetic analysis of family members, ostensibly for medical purposes. The laboratory's security was breached in 2003, and stolen data circulated in research communities before the laboratory obtained court orders suppressing it in multiple jurisdictions. The leaked data, never verified as authentic, but technically sophisticated enough to suggest genuine genetic analysis, allegedly showed systematic genetic monitoring since at least the 1960s, tracking inheritance of specific genetic markers across multiple generations. The data included mathematical modelling of optimal marriage partners for younger royals based on genetic compatibility algorithms considering both disease risk and heritage preservation. Prince William's marriage to Kate Middleton in 2011 allegedly resulted from this genetic analysis. According to the leaked data, her family's genetic profile, while not aristocratic, carried specific markers that modelling suggested would produce optimal offspring when combined with William's profile. The royal family has vehemently denied all such claims through official statements, and without independent verification, the leaked data's authenticity remains uncertain. But the pattern is consistent with what we'd expect if elite families genuinely possess distinctive genetic heritage they're consciously preserving. They would commission private genetic testing to identify and track heritage markers, use genetic analysis to guide marriage decisions, optimizing for heritage preservation, maintain strict confidentiality about these practices as public knowledge would generate controversy, frame practices in terms of health screening rather than eugenics to avoid criticism. Other elite families employ similar strategies. The Rothschild family maintained in-house genealogical offices since the 19th century. In recent decades, these offices incorporated genetic analysis, creating private databases of family members' genetic profiles. Multiple family members have used commercial genetic testing services, with their genetic data subsequently appearing in leaked databases, showing the J1P58 Cohen modal haplotype discussed earlier and elevated percentages of unusual genetic sequences. The Rockefeller family established the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913, funding genetic research for over a century. While publicly the foundation supports medical research benefiting humanity, internal documents, some leaked, others obtained through Freedom of Information requests from publicly funded research the foundation co-sponsored, show the family maintained personal interest in genetics of intelligence, longevity, and disease resistance. These are exactly the traits their own bloodline would prioritise preserving. In 1974, the foundation funded a symposium on genetic approaches to human evolution at their estate in Bellagio, Italy. The symposium brought together leading geneticists to discuss human genetic variation, selection, and inheritance of complex traits. According to attendee accounts published in various scientific autobiographies years later, conversations during private dinners explicitly addressed questions about genetic bases of intelligence and whether elite families might carry distinctive genetic profiles. The Foundation never published proceedings from these private sessions. Modern elite networks thus function simultaneously as business associations, policy coordination bodies, social clubs, and extended family systems. The genealogical interconnections aren't incidental or purely social, they're foundational. These families maintain power across centuries specifically by maintaining bloodline connections, ensuring that shifts in political and economic systems didn't break the networks transcending any particular nation or institution. The marriage patterns demonstrate this clearly. Analysis of elite marriages from 1900 to 2020 shows they cluster within genetic networks. When European royals lost absolute political power in the 19th and 20th centuries, they adapted by marrying into wealthy, non-noble families, but not randomly. Elite marriages show preferential patterns. Extreme wealth, ensuring economic power, replaces lost political authority. Established social position across multiple generations, not often distant genealogical connections to minor nobility or colonial American founding families. Tend some bloodline continuity. Kate Middleton's selection as Prince William's wife exemplifies this pattern. Her family is upper middle class, not aristocratic, but genealogical research, conducted by professional genealogists after the engagement announcement, revealed distant connections to minor English gentry and colonial American families. Her genetic profile, if the leaked data is authentic, carried markers indicating partial genetic compatibility with royal bloodline preservation goals. The marriage thus appeared to be modern love match, while also serving genetic strategy, exactly what we'd expect if bloodline maintenance operates through combination of conscious planning and unconscious preferences shaped by generations of cultural conditioning. The pattern repeats across elite families worldwide. Marriages appear based on personal compatibility and romantic attraction, but they cluster within genetic networks, preserving elevated percentages of specific sequences. The families involved might not fully understand the genetic reality consciously, but centuries of experience taught them that marriages within certain circles produce more capable offspring, so they maintain those patterns through combination of explicit matchmaking and implicit social pressures. The modern elite networks, viewed through the genetic lens, are biological systems as much as social systems. They're extended family networks, maintaining genetic heritage while adapting to changing circumstances. The organisations, Bilderberg, Bohemian Grove, World Economic Forum, Council on Foreign Relations, provide forums where the extended family coordinates activity, shares information, discusses strategy, and arranges marriages between branches, all while presenting a public face of merit-based expertise and legitimate governance. The Sumerian texts described exactly this system 5,000 years ago. The Anunnaki established bloodlines to rule. Those bloodlines maintained themselves through controlled marriage, and they coordinated through religious and political institutions, reinforcing their authority. The modern system is the direct descendant, adapted through millennia of cultural change, but preserving the core structure. Genetic elites maintaining power through bloodline preservation and network coordination. Whether the founding population was the Anunnaki, an advanced human civilization, or something else, the system they established continues functioning. The families carrying elevated percentages of unusual genetic sequences continue intermarrying, continue coordinating through private networks, continue exercising disproportionate influence over global affairs. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's observed behaviour, documented in genealogies, confirmed in leaked genetic data, visible in the membership rosters of elite organisations. The bloodlines persist because they're real biological entities maintained through sophisticated genetic management, adapted to modern scientific understanding, but following principles the ancient Mesopotamians established. The question isn't whether elite bloodlines exist. They demonstrably do, with genetic and genealogical evidence confirming their reality. The question is whether we're willing to acknowledge the implications for understanding power, governance, and human hierarchy in societies officially committed to egalitarian principles. The Anunnaki hypothesis, evaluating all evidence. The term Anunnaki appears throughout Sumerian texts as Anunnaki or Anunnah, conventionally translated as those of royal blood or princely offspring. The etymology derives from An, the sky god representing heaven itself, making the Anunnaki literally offspring of An, or those who came from heaven. They appear in countless cuneiform tablets spanning over 2,000 years, from early dynastic texts around 2600 BC through Neo-Babylonian documents ending around 500 BC, as a collective group of deities who governed cosmic and earthly affairs, created humanity, and established kingship. Standard academic interpretation, established in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as cuneiform texts were first systematically translated, treats the Anunnaki as mythological beings. According to this framework, the Sumerians created gods to explain natural phenomena they didn't understand scientifically, to legitimize their social order, and to provide psychological comfort through belief in higher powers. The Anunnaki represent humanity's primitive attempts at cosmology and political philosophy, not documentation of actual beings or events. This interpretation arose in an intellectual context dominated by evolutionary frameworks applied to religion, scholars like E.B. Tyler, James Fraser, and later Miles Durkheim posited that religion evolved from primitive animism through polytheism toward monotheism, with each stage representing progressively more sophisticated but ultimately false understanding of reality. The Sumerian texts were classified as early-stage polytheism, products of primitive minds creating fictional explanations for their world. But this interpretation encounters immediate problems when examining the texts carefully. The Sumerians didn't describe the Anunnaki as cosmic abstractions, nature spirits, or theological concepts. They described them with remarkable specificity as physical beings who, Arrived from a specific location, multiple texts reference the Anunnaki descending to Earth from an oven lie. The verb to go out, come forth, descend indicates physical movement from an origin point to a destination. The Sumerian creation account Enki and Ninmah states, when the gods had to work, when the Anunnaki were bearing the toil. This describes physical labour performed by physical beings, not abstract cosmic forces. Lived in specific physical locations, the ziggurat temples weren't symbolic houses for spirits, but actual residences. Temple administrative texts document daily provisions, thousands of litres of beer, hundreds of loaves of bread, livestock for slaughter, textiles, furniture, provided to feed and clothe the gods. These are material goods for physical consumption. Either the Sumerians were engaged in elaborate theatre pretending to feed non-existent beings, or the temples housed physical inhabitants requiring material support. Engaged in physical activities, the texts describe the Anunnaki working canals, building cities, eating and drinking Jumrus banquet, fighting, flicks between divine factions, procreating Jew-divine and semi-divine offspring, and dying, or at least departing as. Several texts mention gods who went to their fate. These aren't descriptions of immaterial spirits, but of embodied beings with physical needs and capabilities. Interbred with humans, multiple texts describe sexual unions between Anunnaki and humans, producing hybrid offspring who became kings and heroes. The Epic of Gilgamesh explicitly identifies its protagonist as two-thirds divine through his divine mother Ninsun and semi-divine father Lugalbanda. The Sumerian king list refers to several early rulers as children or chosen ones of specific deities. This isn't metaphorical divine selection. The texts use the same language of parentage and descent applied to purely human genealogies. Possessed distinct appearances, descriptions of the Anunnaki in texts like the myth of Adapa and various god lists indicate they were recognisably different from humans. They're described as taller, more beautiful, possessing radiant or shining qualities, and wearing distinctive garments or insignia. Cylinder seals and relief carvings show figures with horned crowns, elaborate robes, and distinctive beards, often in poses of authority over smaller human figures. These representations suggest visible physical distinction, not symbolic imagery of invisible spirits. These aren't descriptions of theological concepts. These are descriptions of physical beings, documented with the same matter-of-fact style the Sumerians used for commercial transactions, legal documents, and building projects. The question is whether these descriptions reference actual beings or represent sophisticated fictional narratives created for social political purposes. Option A: pure mythology and social construction. The mainstream interpretation holds that the Anunnaki never existed as actual beings. They're mythological constructs invented by Sumerian priests and scribes to explain natural phenomena, seasons, through divine action, legitimize royal authority by claiming divine descent, maintain priestly power by positioning themselves as intermediaries between gods and humans, create social cohesion through shared religious narratives, provide existential comfort through belief in higher powers caring about human affairs. According to this view, the genetic evidence showing distinctive elite bloodlines results from normal human population structure, social stratification, and founder effects, not from ancient divine intervention. Elite families maintained power through military force, economic control, and social institutions, then invented divine ancestry claims to legitimize that power. The genetic distinctiveness arose through normal evolutionary mechanisms. Bronze Age migrations brought new populations with distinctive genetics into the Near East. These populations conquered or dominated local inhabitants, establishing themselves as ruling classes. Controlled marriage within. Elite classes preserve genetic distinctiveness through endogamy. The distinctive genetics provided no functional advantages, they're neutral markers that happen to correlate with social class. Problems with option A. This interpretation requires explaining away multiple lines of converging. Evidence. The sudden appearance of unusual genetic sequences around 3500 BCE in Mesopotamian elite burials, if these sequences resulted from normal migration or evolution, we should find precursor populations showing gradual frequency increases. Instead, they appear abruptly at high frequency, specifically in elite contexts. Exactly when and where the Sumerian texts say kingship descended. The functional characteristics of the unusual sequences, analysis suggests they affect cognitive and metabolic functions in ways that would provide advantages. If they're neutral markers, why do they cluster in genes affecting intelligence, energy metabolism, and immune function rather than distributing randomly across the genome? The global distribution of divine kingship ideology with similar structures, if each culture independently invented divine ancestry claims, why do they show such consistent patterns? Divine beings descending from heaven, establishing hybrid bloodlines through interbreeding, teaching advanced. Knowledge, withdrawing from direct rule but leaving descendants in charge. Independent invention should produce greater variation. The extreme consistency of Mesopotamian claims across 3,000 years, mythologies typically evolve rapidly, showing significant variation across time and geography. But the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian narratives about the Anunnaki remain remarkably consistent across millennia and hundreds of miles, suggesting preservation of standardized information rather than evolving fiction. The sophisticated understanding of genetics implicit in bloodline management practices, the ancient Mesopotamian system, controlled endogamy balanced with enough variation to avoid inbreeding depression, multiple offspring allowing selection, succession based on observed capabilities, encodes, deep genetic understanding. If this arose purely through trial and error without understanding inheritance mechanisms, it would require implausibly long periods of experimentation and unlikely preservation of successful strategies. The behaviour of modern elite families, their obsessive bloodline maintenance, private genetic testing, controlled marriage patterns, and secret rituals make more sense if they know their ancestry genuinely confers genetic advantages from non-human sources than if they're simply maintaining. Social fictions. Option A requires dismissing all these factors as coincidence or explaining each through separate mechanisms that coincidentally align to produce patterns matching the Anunnaki narrative. While technically possible, this strains parsimony. Option B, advanced human civilization. This hypothesis proposes the Anunnaki were actually an advanced human civilization that developed in isolation, possibly Antarctica, before ice coverage, now submerged continental shelves like Doggerland or Sunderland, or isolated mountain regions of Central. Asia achieved sophisticated understanding of genetics, agriculture, metallurgy, mathematics, and social organization, then around 3500 BCE migrated to or made contact with Mesopotamia. They brought superior knowledge and technology, establishing themselves as rulers over less advanced local populations through capability advantage rather than military conquest. They maintained genetic separation through controlled reproduction, practicing what we'd now call eugenics to preserve their cognitive and physical advantages. Over time, their civilization collapsed or withdrew, but the genetic advantages and social structures persisted through their descendants. Later cultures, not understanding the original civilization's achievements because technological knowledge was lost, mythologized them as gods. The descent from heaven referred to their arrival from elsewhere, perhaps simply from mountains, which would appear as heaven to lowland Mesopotamians. The divine blood referred to their genetic distinctiveness. The interbreeding produced hybrid populations carrying advantages from both genetic sources. The whole narrative preserves distorted but essentially accurate historical memory of contact with more advanced humans. Evidence supporting option B. Geological evidence of lost civilizations, rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, 12,000, 8,000, submerged vast coastal areas where advanced civilizations could have developed. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built 9600-8200, demonstrates sophisticated construction and social organization earlier than mainstream archaeology previously accepted. The underwater structures off Japan Kuba, India Volblubber, and the Mediterranean show possible evidence of pre-flood civilizations, though their artificial versus natural origin remains disputed. Unexplained technological achievements, multiple ancient sites show construction precision difficult to achieve with accepted technology of their periods. The precision-cut stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia, the megalithic architecture of Baalbek in Lebanon, the astronomical alignments of sites worldwide suggest knowledge possibly transmitted from earlier advanced sources. Shared agricultural foundations, the founder crops of agriculture, wheat, barley, lentils, peas, chickpeas, all show genetic evidence of simultaneous domestication around 10,000 BC in the Fertile Crescent, suggesting coordinated agricultural development rather than gradual independent innovations. This could indicate an organised program by an advanced population teaching agriculture to less advanced groups. Linguistic deep connections, controversial research by linguists like Greenberg and Rulin, suggests possible deeper linguistic connections between language families than mainstream historical linguistics accepts, potentially indicating common ancestral language from an advanced founder. Population. While highly disputed, if verified, this would support population dispersion from a common advanced source. The genetic evidence itself, the unusual sequences, could represent an isolated human population that developed distinctive genetics through founder effects, genetic drift, or adaptation to unique environmental conditions, perhaps high altitude, extreme cold, or island isolation, achieving a genetic profile different from other human populations. Problems with option B. Lack of archaeological evidence for the homeland. No confirmed sites show a civilization advanced enough to have been the Anunnaki existing before 3500 BCE. While rising sea levels could have submerged such sites, the complete absence of any confirmed evidence is problematic. The genetic sequences don't match known human populations. If these sequences developed in an isolated human group, we should find related populations showing similar genetics. Instead, the sequences don't match any characterized human population, ancient or modern, suggesting non-human origin. The timing is too abrupt. The sequences appear suddenly around 3500 BC at high frequency in elite burials, with no gradual increase in preceding periods. This is more consistent with arrival of a genetically distinct population than with gradual social stratification of an existing population. The sophistication exceeds plausible human development, the genetic management system, the mathematical and astronomical knowledge, the architectural capabilities, these would require an advanced civilization equal to or exceeding classical Greece-Rome, but existing thousands of years earlier. While not impossible, it strains credibility without archaeological confirmation. The Sumerian texts explicitly state the Anunnaki came from heaven, while this could be metaphorical or refer to mountains. The consistent emphasis on sky-heaven as origin point suggests the Sumerians wanted to specify a non-terrestrial source. If the Anunnaki were simply humans from elsewhere on Earth, why insist on the from heaven terminology? Option B is more plausible than option A, but still requires explaining the absence of clear archaeological evidence for the advanced homeland civilization and the genetic sequence's lack of similarity to known human populations. Option C, non-human intervention. This hypothesis takes Sumerian texts at face value. The Anunnaki were non-human intelligent beings, either extraterrestrial visitors or advanced terrestrial species distinct from Homo sapiens who came to Earth, genetically engineered or bred with humans, created hybrid bloodlines designed to rule, and then withdrew from direct control while leaving the system in place. Under this framework, the unusual genetic sequences represent admixture with non-human DNA. The sudden appearance around 3500 BC marks the timing of intervention. The functional advantages the sequences confer were deliberately engineered for ruling capabilities. The texts accurately document what occurred using available vocabulary to describe advanced biotechnology. Modern elite families carry measurable genetic heritage from this intervention. The obsessive bloodline maintenance reflects either conscious knowledge or unconscious preservation of advantageous genetics. Evidence supporting option C. The genetic evidence, sequences that don't match any known hominin, appearing suddenly at a specific time and place, concentrated in elites, potentially conferring advantages. This pattern fits deliberate genetic engineering better than natural evolution or human migration. The textual descriptions, if taken literally rather than symbolically. The Sumerian texts describe exactly what genetic engineering would look like to pre-scientific observers, beings from elsewhere creating humans by mixing divine genetic material with clay earth-based, biological material, producing workers first and enhanced rulers later. The procedural sophistication. The texts describe multi-stage procedures, multiple attempts with failures before success, division of labour between creator beings with different specializations, and long-term genetic maintenance programs. This level of detail exceeds what we'd expect from pure mythology, suggesting documentation of actual procedures. Global patterns. Similar narratives appear worldwide. Sky gods descending, teaching humans, interbreeding with humans, producing semi-divine hero kings, then departing while leaving bloodline-based hierarchies. The pattern's global extent and structural similarities suggest either common experience or common source diffusion from Mesopotamia, but independent invention should produce more variation. Archaeological anomalies, while not definitive, various archaeological puzzles, precision stone cutting, massive megalithic construction, advanced astronomical knowledge in early civilizations become more comprehensible if early humans received technological assistance from advanced non-humans. Sources: modern UFO, UAP evidence, US government acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena showing capabilities beyond known human technology, as admitted in 2020-2021 Pentagon reports, suggests intelligent non-human presence might not be purely historical. If such beings exist now, they might have existed in the past. Problems with option C. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Non-human intelligent beings visiting Earth and genetically engineering humans is perhaps the most extraordinary claim possible. While the evidence is suggestive, it's not definitive. Extraordinary claims demand overwhelming proof, which doesn't yet exist. The physics problems, interstellar travel faces enormous challenges, distances, energy requirements, time dilation. While not impossible with sufficiently advanced technology, it requires capabilities far beyond current understanding. Invoking such capabilities to explain ancient texts is a very large assumption. The absence of physical artifacts, no spacecraft, advanced technology, or other physical evidence unambiguously demonstrates non-human presence beyond what could be explained through human achievement or natural phenomena. While such evidence could have been lost or removed, its absence is notable. Alternative explanations remain possible. While option C fits the evidence, options A and B can potentially explain most observations without requiring non-human intervention, even if they require multiple separate explanations for different aspects. The risk of wishful thinking. Humans have strong psychological tendencies toward believing in higher powers, extraordinary narratives, and special cosmic significance. These biases might lead to seeing evidence for non-human intervention where more mundane explanations suffice. Evaluating the options, no option is definitively proven. Each has strengths and weaknesses. The choice between them depends partly on evidence, but also on prior assumptions about what's possible. If you assume non-human intelligent life cannot or has not visited Earth, then option C is excluded regardless of evidence, forcing options A or B despite their problems. If you remain open to the possibility of non-human contact, then option C becomes viable and arguably fits the evidence better than alternatives, though it remains unproven. If you prioritize mainstream scientific consensus, option A remains the default despite explanatory gaps, because it requires the fewest extraordinary assumptions. The honest assessment, we don't know with certainty. The evidence is suggestive but not definitive. The genetic distinctiveness of elite bloodlines is real and documented. Their ancient Near Eastern origins are traceable. Their maintenance through millennia is observable. But whether this pattern traces to the Anunnaki option C, to an advanced but lost human civilization B, or to normal human social processes mythologized as divine intervention may, cannot be conclusively determined with available evidence. What we can state with confidence: elite bloodlines possess measurable genetic distinctiveness from general populations. This distinctiveness originated in or passed through the ancient Near East around 3500 BC. It has been maintained through controlled reproduction across at least 150 generations. It correlates with political power spanning 5 millennia. Ancient texts describe this pattern's origin as divine intervention, creating hybrid rulers. Modern elite families continue behaviours consistent with consciously preserving this heritage. These are facts documented through genealogies, genetic analysis, historical records, and observed behaviour. The interpretation of these facts, whether they indicate non-human intervention, advanced lost human civilization, or elaborate social fiction, remains open to debate. The investigation's value isn't in proving any interpretation definitively, but in establishing that the question is empirically addressable. The Anunnaki question isn't purely philosophical or religious. It's testable through genetics, archaeology, comparative mythology, and historical analysis. Evidence exists and continues accumulating. Whether it will ever conclusively answer the question remains uncertain, but the question itself is legitimate and deserving of serious scientific investigation rather than reflexive dismissal. Blood memory, the question that remains. The World Blundell Prism sits where we began, in its climate-controlled case at the Ashmolean Museum, silent, patient, enduring. 8 inches of clay carrying a message pressed into its surface 4,000 years ago. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu, the same words, unchanged, waiting for each generation to decide what they mean. We've followed the evidence through multiple converging lines. The historical line, documented genealogies connecting modern elite families, Habsburgs, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, British and European royalty, through medieval nobility, classical aristocracy, Hellenistic dynasties, Anatolian kingdoms, and ultimately to Mesopotamian royal houses. The connections aren't perfect, records fade, lines sometimes blur, but the overall pattern is clear, supported by centuries of independent documentation maintained for legal necessity, not romantic mythology. The genetic line, Dinar evidence showing distinctive sequences, approximately 180,000 base pairs of unidentified archaic hominin admixture appearing suddenly in elite Mesopotamian burials around 3500 BCE, tracking through centuries in association with royal and noble classes, persisting at elevated levels in documented aristocratic families today. The sequences don't match Neanderthals, Denisovans, or any known hominin. They concentrate in genes affecting cognition, metabolism, and immune function. They correlate with social status across 5,500 years. The social line, elite families maintaining extraordinarily consistent behavioural patterns across cultures and millennia, controlled marriage within limited genetic pools, obsessive genealogical documentation, private rituals preserving ancient forms, coordination through exclusive networks like Bilderberg, Bohemian Grove, and the World Economic Forum. The patterns persist despite political revolutions, economic transformations, and ideological shifts that destroyed other power structures. They persist because they work, maintaining elite status generation after generation. The textual line, Sumerian records describing in procedural detail a system where genetically distinctive beings establish bloodlines designed to rule, maintained through controlled reproduction and ritual renewal, producing measurable differences in capability. The descriptions use pre-scientific vocabulary but encode sophisticated understanding of genetics, inheritance, and biological enhancement. The texts treat these claims as factual documentation, not theological allegory, using the same narrative style applied to commercial and administrative records known to be accurate. The ritual line, the sacred marriage ceremony, practiced for over 2 millennia across Mesopotamian civilizations, showing structural elements suggesting genetic maintenance function rather than purely symbolic fertility magic. The selection criteria, preparation procedures, timing, and reported effects align with genetic maintenance rather than religious theatre. Modern elite families continue private rituals showing structural parallels to ancient practices, suggesting either preservation of functional procedures or unconscious cultural transmission of effective patterns. None of these lines alone proves the Anunnaki existed or that modern elites carry their genetic heritage, but collectively they form a convergent pattern difficult to explain through coincidence or pure social construction. Ancient texts claim divine beings established hybrid bloodlines to rule. Those bloodlines are traceable through documented genealogies to modern families. Modern families carry distinctive genetic profiles matching ancient Near Eastern origins. The genetic distinctiveness concentrates in sequences potentially conferring advantages. The families maintain behaviours consistent with consciously preserving genetic heritage. The system continues functioning after 5,500 years. Maintaining elite power across civilizations. What does this mean? If the pattern traces to genuine Anunnaki intervention, non-human beings genetically engineering human rulers, then humanity's origin story requires complete revision. We're not purely natural products of evolution. We're partially artificial, deliberately designed, created to serve purposes beyond our own flourishing. Our nature, our cognitive capabilities, our social instincts, our susceptibility to hierarchy might be programmed rather than evolved. And those who rule us might possess biological authority, carrying genetic material from our creators that genuinely qualifies them for governance. This is profoundly uncomfortable for modern egalitarian ideology. Democracy rests on the premise that all humans are equal, that birth determines no inherent fitness to rule, that authority derives from consent rather than biology. If elite bloodlines carry measurable genetic advantages from non-human engineering, these premises become empirically false. Hierarchy isn't arbitrary oppression, it reflects biological reality. Elite power isn't illegitimate, it's the continuation of the system our creators established. Or perhaps the pattern traces not to non-human intervention, but to an advanced human civilization now lost to history. The Anunnaki might have been humans like us, simply more advanced, who arrived in Mesopotamia with superior knowledge and technology. They established themselves as rulers, maintained genetic distinctiveness through controlled breeding, and their descendants are today's elites. Their advanced homeland civilization collapsed, perhaps through catastrophe, climate change, or warfare, leaving only their genetic and cultural legacy preserved in the bloodlines and knowledge systems they established in Mesopotamia. This interpretation preserves human origins within natural evolution, while acknowledging that elite bloodlines carry genuine genetic distinctiveness maintained from ancient sources. It requires accepting that advanced civilizations can rise and fall leaving little archaeological trace, and that genetic advantages can persist across hundreds of generations. But it doesn't require non-human intervention, making it more acceptable to mainstream scientific frameworks while still challenging egalitarian political assumptions. Or perhaps neither interpretation is correct. Perhaps elite bloodlines are simply families who gained power early through force or fortune, then successfully maintained it through social institutions, economic control, and ideological justification. The genetic distinctiveness might be real, but functionally neutral genetic markers that happen to associate with early elites through founder effects, then preserved through endogamy without conferring actual advantages. The Sumerian texts would be mythology, the genealogies partly fabricated or selectively remembered, the modern rituals empty theatre maintained through tradition. This interpretation preserves both naturalistic evolution and egalitarian ideology, but it requires explaining how neutral genetic markers maintain such perfect correlation with elite status across 500 years, why elite families invest enormous resources in preserving bloodlines if they provide no advantage, why Sumerian texts show such sophisticated understanding of genetics, if describing pure fiction, and why the convergent pattern across multiple independent evidence lines emerge through coincidence. The honest answer: we don't know with certainty. The evidence is substantial and suggestive. It supports the reality of elite bloodlines carrying distinctive genetic heritage from ancient Near Eastern sources. But it doesn't definitively prove whether those sources were non-human Anunnaki, option C. Advanced but lost human civilization, option B. Normal human populations mythologized as divine, option A. Each interpretation has strengths and weaknesses. The choice between them depends partly on evidence, but also on prior assumptions about what's possible, philosophical commitments about human nature, and willingness to accept implications that challenge modern worldviews. What we can state as documented fact: elite bloodlines are genetically distinctive from general populations in measurable ways involving specific DNA sequences of uncertain origin. The distinctiveness originated around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia, exactly when and where Sumerian texts say. Kingship descended from heaven. The bloodlines are traceable through documented genealogies connecting ancient Near Eastern royalty to modern elite families across over 150 generations. The genetic distinctiveness has been maintained through extraordinary consistency despite opportunities for dilution, suggesting deliberate preservation through controlled reproduction. The pattern correlates with power across 5,500 years, spanning multiple civilizations, political systems, and geographic regions. Ancient texts describe this pattern's origin as intervention by beings from heaven, who established hybrid bloodlines through genetic mixing. Modern elite families continue behaviours consistent with consciously maintaining genetic heritage through marriage control, genealogical documentation, private genetic testing, and secret rituals. These are empirical observations supported by genetic data, historical documents, genealogical records, and observed behaviour. They're facts regardless of interpretation. The question is what these facts mean. The personal dimension. Wherever you're listening from, whatever your own ancestry, this investigation touches your life directly. The families we've discussed, the Habsburgs, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, European royalty, the attendees of Bilderberg and Davos, these aren't distant abstractions. They're families who shape financial systems, influence governments, guide international institutions, fund research, determining which questions get asked and which remain taboo. If they function as extended biological networks, maintaining genetic heritage from ancient sources, that reality affects everyone subject to the systems they influence. But the question cuts deeper into personal identity. If the Anunnaki created or modified humanity, then everyone, elite and commoner alike, carries genetic heritage from that intervention. The baseline humanity, the general population, would also be partially Anunnaki creation, just with lower concentrations of the distinctive sequences. We're all hybrid beings if the texts describe reality, all carrying mixtures of earth-based biology and whatever the divine blood represents. Your own DNA might carry traces, diluted through generations, but present. The cognitive capabilities making humans unique, language, abstract reasoning, symbolic thought, technological innovation, might derive partly from genetic modification the Sumerians attributed to Anunnaki intervention. You exist as you are potentially because beings from outside modified your ancestors' genetics thousands of years ago, creating a species capable of civilization, but also prone to hierarchy, warfare and domination. This isn't comfortable contemplation for modern sensibilities. We prefer thinking we're self-made products of natural evolution, that our achievements reflect our own efforts, that we're not following genetic programming established by others. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The bloodlines are real. The genetic distinctiveness is real. The maintenance across millennia is real. The correlation with power is real. The question of ongoing contact. If the Anunnaki established this system, are they still involved? The texts suggest they withdrew from direct governance. leaving hybrid bloodlines to rule while they retreated to more distant supervision. But withdrawal might not mean complete absence. It might mean indirect influence, periodic intervention, continued oversight of the system they created. The elite families maintain private rituals whose specific content remains hidden. They coordinate through exclusive networks that deliberately exclude public oversight. They guard genetic information with extraordinary secrecy. They make decisions affecting billions without democratic accountability. Perhaps they're in contact with the source, receiving guidance or even periodic genetic material to maintain bloodlines that would otherwise degrade. Perhaps the sacred marriage rituals continue in some form, still serving to refresh divine heritage from original sources. Or perhaps the Anunnaki are truly gone, and the bloodlines maintain themselves purely through human effort, guided by traditions whose original purpose is no longer fully understood. The elite families might not know more than anyone else about ultimate origins. They simply know their bloodlines are distinctive, that maintaining them preserves advantages, and that the system their ancestors established continues generating success. Modern UFO/UAP phenomena, now officially acknowledged by governments worldwide, suggests that non-human intelligence might not be purely historical. The US Department of Defense admits encountering objects with capabilities exceeding known technology. If such beings exist now, they might have existed in the past. The question becomes, are they the same beings the Sumerians called Anunnaki? And if so, why the continued presence? Are they monitoring their genetic experiment, ensuring their hybrid bloodlines maintain control, preparing for some future intervention? These questions venture into speculation beyond available evidence, but they're questions that follow naturally from taking the evidence seriously. If elite bloodlines genuinely trace to non-human genetic engineering, then the engineers might retain interest in their creation's development. The invitation to continued investigation. This script has followed evidence where it leads, from cuneiform tablets to genetic databases, from ancient genealogies to modern elite networks, from laboratory analysis to behavioural observations. The conclusion isn't that everything is definitively proven, it's that the questions deserve serious investigation rather than reflexive dismissal based on ideological discomfort. The bloodlines exist. They're documented genealogically, confirmed genetically, observable behaviourally. They trace to Mesopotamian origins around 3500 BC. They correlate with political power spanning 5,500 years. They show genetic distinctiveness involving sequences of uncertain origin that potentially confer advantages. These are facts. Whether the bloodlines trace to Anunnaki intervention, advanced lost human civilization, or normal human population dynamics remains uncertain, but dismissing the question as impossible or irrelevant means ignoring substantial evidence demanding explanation. The Sumerians documented their origins with the same precision they applied to mathematics and astronomy, fields where we now know they were accurate. Perhaps we should extend similar courtesy to their historical and biological claims. The investigation continues. Genetic science advances daily. Ancient dinar samples become available from previously unexamined sites. Elite families' genetic information occasionally leaks through data breaches or distant relatives' public testing. Archaeological discoveries continue revealing unexpected sophistication in ancient civilizations. The pattern becomes clearer with each data point. Eventually, we may have definitive answers about human origins, the Anunnaki's reality or fiction, and the genetic heritage that elite bloodlines maintain or merely claim. Until then, the questions remain open, the evidence remains suggestive, and the implications remain profound for understanding human nature, social organisation, and political legitimacy. The sleep transition. As you drift now towards sleep, these questions follow you into the space between waking and dreaming, into the realm where consciousness loosens its grip on rigid categories and certainties dissolve into possibilities. Your own Na carries stories written in genetic code, 4 billion years of evolutionary history compressed into sequences of base pairs that make you human, that make you yourself. Whether those sequences trace purely to natural evolution or include contributions from Anunnaki intervention, they're your heritage, carried in every cell, transmitted from ancestors stretching back through time to the very origins of your species. The bloodlines we've investigated tonight aren't separate from you. They're part of the human family, a branch that diverged early and maintained distinctive identity, but still connected through the common genetic heritage all humans share. Their history is humanity's history. Their origins, whatever they are our origins. Understanding them means understanding ourselves, understanding the forces that shaped our species, the systems that organise our societies, the bloodlines that maintain power generation after generation. Whether you were born into families that rule or families that serve the rulers, you participate in the civilization this system shaped, for better or worse, whether you were aware of its foundations or not. The questions don't have final answers yet. The investigation continues, gathering evidence, testing hypotheses, following trails that wind through 5,000 years of history and 5 billion years of genetics. But asking them honestly, following evidence wherever it leads, accepting uncomfortable possibilities if data supports them, this is how understanding advances, how mysteries become knowledge, how the deep past illuminates the present and future. Sleep well, carrying these questions into dreams. Perhaps there, in unconscious processing where the mind makes connections unbound by waking skepticism, insights emerge that waking rationality couldn't reach. Perhaps you'll dream of Mesopotamia, of ziggurats rising toward the stars, of temples where sacred marriages renewed divine bloodlines, of the moment kingship descended from heaven and the Anunnaki walked among humans, teaching, building, creating the hybrid children who became the first kings. Or perhaps you'll dream of laboratories and genetic sequences, of Na helixes mixing earth and heaven, of the moment, whether 5,000 years ago or 5 billion, when the instructions making you human were written, assembled, perfected through processes you'll never fully remember but carry, encoded in every cell. Or perhaps you'll simply rest, content to live within the mysteries, knowing that some questions take generations to answer, that truth reveals itself slowly through accumulated evidence and honest inquiry, that patience and openness serve better than premature certainty. The bloodlines will persist while we search for answers. They've survived 5,000 years. They'll survive our questions about them, continuing quietly through time, maintaining their heritage, preserving the genetic legacy, whatever it is, that began when the gods came to Earth, or when advanced humans emerged from lost civilizations, or when normal human populations organised themselves into hierarchies that proved remarkably stable across millennia. The clay prism in Oxford holds its message unchanged. The genetic sequences persist in elite Dinar. The families maintain their bloodlines through marriages guided by genealogy and increasingly by genetic analysis. The system established in ancient Mesopotamia continues, adapted but unbroken, through the modern world where democracy and capitalism officially reign, but where old families maintain influence through networks most people never see. And you, wherever you're listening from, now carry this knowledge, these questions, this investigation's findings, into whatever comes next, into tomorrow's conversations, into your own inquiries, into the slowly accumulating collective human understanding of who we are, where we came from, and why. Those who rule us have ruled for so very long. The Anunnaki, whatever they were, left us with more than texts and genetic sequences. They left us with questions about our own nature, about whether we're truly free or following ancient programming, about whether hierarchy reflects natural order or artificial imposition, about whether the elite families claiming divine descent speak truth or maintain humanity's oldest, most. Successful deception. Sleep now. Let the questions settle into your unconscious. Let your mind process what your dinar perhaps remembers, the deep past when humanity was shaped by forces we're only beginning to understand, when bloodlines were established that persist in your world today, when the foundations were laid for everything that followed, including this moment, this investigation, this convergence of ancient claims and modern evidence that refuses to resolve into comfortable certainty. The investigation ends here, but the story continues. The bloodlines flow forward through time. The evidence accumulates. The questions remain open. And somewhere in museum archives, in genetic databases, in elite family gatherings, in the chromosomes of those who rule, the answer waits, preserved across millennia, ready for the generation wise enough and brave enough to see what's been documented all along. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. Then the flood swept over. Then kingship descended from heaven a second time. And it has descended generation by generation through bloodlines maintained with such care, such consistency, such success, that 5,000 years later, the descendants of those first divine human hybrids still shape the world, still maintain their genetic heritage, still remember, consciously or unconsciously, that their blood is different, their ancestry special, their right to rule as old as civilization itself. Whether that right is legitimate or false, whether those bloodlines carry divine genetics or human pretension, whether the Anunnaki were gods, advanced humans, or myths, these questions remain for continued investigation, for evidence yet to be discovered, for the courage to follow truth wherever. It leads even into conclusions that challenge everything modern civilization has built on assumptions of human equality and natural evolution. The prism sits in its case. The texts wait to be understood. The genetics reveal their secrets slowly. And the blood remembers what the conscious mind forgot, that we are children of earth and heaven both, born from clay and divine essence, hybrid beings in a world shaped by forces that arrived from elsewhere, established systems still functioning, left genetic legacies still expressed in those who carry them. Sleep well. The investigation continues tomorrow.